All right, looks like we are live. Welcome everybody to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny, and I am your host for this important discussion with Professor David McQueen and George Bond, my award-winning flood researchers. Tonight we are discussing the heat and the radiation problem. This discussion relates to the prolific debate between Professor David McQueen and King Crocoduck that took place on Modern Day Debate about a month ago. They debated, is radiometric dating reliable? I must say before we start, though, that was an excellent debate. I moderated it, and both Professor McQueen and King Crocoduck, KC specifically, even though I would disagree with him on this topic, he was very professional and respectful during that debate. And so, of course, I appreciate that kind of approach and attitude. So with that being said, Professor McQueen, it looks like you have your partner in crime with you today for this important show. Why don't you introduce us?
Actually, two of them. I have not only Batman, but this is Stanley, the Bat Dog, with his own cape that he wears as we fight crime in Gotham City. And he has watched both Crocoduck and also Erica, and he's developed a taste for both crocodile and gibbon. Here you go, Stanley. Oh, there's some crocodile for you. And then here is some gibbon for you. Now run off and chew up the enemies of truth there. So much for joking around. I am in a different place now. We're talking about heat in cold Mississippi, and I left up here temporarily the drawings of my grandchildren that'll come back from a play here in a few minutes. But I'll erase those when we get into the depths of things. I always like to begin with Robin, known as George Bond, and he certainly needs to hear a new joke. You ready, Brother George?
Go for it. I haven't got any today. I thought this was too serious to joke around, but go for it.
It's the best way to start a very serious show, George. Or I should say Robin is with a couple
That's true. We'll go serious here tonight. The sheriff of our parish here in Louisiana, not county, but parish, called Shirley the other day and said, "We found David's body in the big creek down from your house." And she was shocked on the phone. She said, "That's not where I put it." I found that a bit cruel myself.
George, I got to say, that's going to be a tough one for you to top because that was good. It was quick. It was easy to get. It gave me a good laugh, David. Laughter is the best medicine. George, are you going to try and top that, or are we just going to get right into it?
No, let's get right into it.
Let's get into it.
That avatar on the screen is my dog, Cinderella. I call her Cinder for short.
We've got two dogs.
I've got two dogs. The other one's sitting next to me, but Cinder passed away a couple of years ago.
Oh, sorry. Stanley, the bat dog, went away. Donny, will you start my 10-minute 10-minute timer, and then I'll turn it over to George after that for 20 minutes of his intro, and then
I was just going to ask George firstly, Professor McQueen, is your dog a young Earth creationist as well, just like Professor McQueen's bat dog, George?
Oh, definitely.
That's good.
They know what's good for them.
Yeah.
That's good.
I'm going to point out Hurricane Havoc's comment as well. Thank you, Hurricane. He says, "I'm not saying that Professor McQueen is Batman. I'm only saying you've never seen McQueen and Batman in the same room together." That's a good point.
Actually, I have got a joke that'll top David's joke.
Okay, let me erase the board while you talk.
Okay, a frog telephoned the psychic hotline and was told, "You are going to meet a beautiful young woman who will know everything about you." The frog said, "That's great. Will I meet her at the party or what?" "No," said the psychic. "Next term in her biology class."
Oh, That poor frog.
That poor frog.
Yeah.
Okay, well, with that, let me say this to the audience. We are going to be, as usual, making this interactive. So we are going to be having Professor McQueen. He's going to be starting off with us tonight. Then we're going to hand it to George. He's got a presentation as well. And during those portions of today's show, feel free to send in your questions, your objections, your challenges. Now is your chance. That's why we're doing this live. I'll save them, and then we're going to do a Q&A period before we get to the hour mark. And it sounds like your dog is good with that there, George. And again, this is related to the King Crocoduck and Professor David McQueen debate. And also our favorite evolutionist, Gutsy Gibbon, put out a video and put forth a few points that we're going to address here tonight as well. So with that, Professor McQueen, we're going to hand it over to you.
Okay, I'm going to start my timer for the 10 minutes here. I want to begin by complimenting both King Crocoduck and also Erica for the respect that they showed me in my debate with King Crocoduck, and also Erica's comments. I'm hoping, Donny, that we can organize another debate with King Crocoduck in February to focus in on the statistics of flood geology. And then if you could help me organize in March a debate with Erica herself. I think it's time for she and I to bounce ideas off. Okay, now from cold Mississippi, we want to talk about the issue of the heat problem. And as always, whenever we're dealing with standing for truth, we're dealing with the truth of God's word. For our 50th wedding anniversary that happened a couple of months ago, we got a new translation of the Bible that is called the New Living Bible. And so I'll use that tonight. If you want to turn with me to the book of beginnings, Genesis. And we want to ask ourselves, where does this issue of the generation of heat during the continental movements during the Great Flood, where does that found in the Bible? Where does the Bible even bring up an issue that might relate on what King Crocoduck talked about the issue of radiation and how much radiation would be given off? So where would we even begin to find that in the Bible? There are certainly, at the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then you come down to the second day of creation, a day that's a very complicated day, dealing with the canopy, some would say. And then you get down to the third day, and it says, let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place so that dry land may appear. And that is what happened, and God called the dry land, the dry ground land, and the waters he called seas. And so we have some activity there that may have generated heat on the third day of creation. But the focus of tonight is Dr. Baumgartner's work dealing with what is called catastrophic plate tectonics. And we come over to Genesis chapter 5, and we notice the last verse of Genesis chapter 5 says, well, let's go back 1 to 31. And Lamech lived 777 years. Then he died. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So the creationist argument is that there were 8 people on board the ark, plus 2 of every land-breathing creatures. There were no aquaria on the ark, no need for what was in the ocean. And then we come up to chapter 6, where we have God's judgment on the earth and a discussion about the ark itself. And then as we go over here and we hear about God's, I turn 2 pages there. So it's Genesis 6, 7, and 8 we want to focus on. And so let's start with 7:11. When Noah was 600 years old, that's 100 years after what we previously read, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth, and rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky, and the rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. If you go back to the King James Version, that reads that the fountains of the great deep erupted. And so as we begin to talk about the critique of the comments of both King Crocoduck and also Erica, which many of you have watched, you have seen her use one of my props on her video, this paper towel roll, which I've used in the past to illustrate some of the physics of what George and I have worked on for well over a year. Erica, was very critical of me and George that we started talking about this over a year ago and we haven't published the paper yet. Well, this is complicated stuff. And one thing I've come to realize as I have thought about all that's gone on since the debate is that sometimes I don't draw a proper distinction between hypothesis, theory, and fact. And so I want to go back, and Donny has put into the feed details about my July 2022 debate with Luca out of Italy. And I commented in that debate, as I will elaborate on as we go on through the night, that there are 3 areas of failure in the evolutionary counter-argument to this issue of heat and catastrophic plate tectonics and so forth. The problems revolve around algebra, calculus, and differential equations. I'll point out in the next 2 hours that this whole issue is wrong from the point of view of algebra, because one of the foundational principles which King Crocoduck kept accusing, oh, McQueen, you're not going back to foundational physics. Well, what about this? We know from this statement of entropy in that equation that heat cannot of itself pass from a colder to a hotter body. And then there's the expression in joules and so forth. I'll say a calorie is about 4 joules. That's the issue of hot crust, cold crust. And then I'll elaborate later on, and you can check it out on this other debate, that the whole issue is wrong from the standpoint of calculus too. The old Earth mantle crustal thermodynamics, the evolutionary community violate Carnot's cycle. Here's a Carnot cycle from physics, and you'll notice that the partial of pressure as a function of time, temperature rather, the partial of heat as a function of temperature. That violates the second law because in the old Earth view, entropy always increases. I'm sorry. They're violating the second law because they're saying that they can get around the problem of entropy. And we'll save this for the second hour. But if you go to this reference of Stacy and look at the issue of mantle creep, here's the differential equation that you come up with. And those of you that are aware of differentials, you'll notice that epsilon dot is the rate of deformation by creep. And creep is a combination of activation energy and all the rest. But at a very small sigma, the mathematics shows that this is actually this argument that is given is insufficient. In other words, catastrophic plate tectonics can indeed proceed as it should. I think that I'm at my 10-minute mark. Is that correct, Donny?
Yes. Yeah, you're 10 minutes on the dot.
Okay.
Professor McQueen, I appreciate it.
I will turn it over to my colleague, George, and he can begin.
And before you go, George, my award-winning co-host, let me just answer a couple of these questions. Taylor K, I appreciate you being here. Good question. So the the debate between Professor David McQueen and King Crocoduck was over on Modern Day Debate. This was about a month ago now. The title was Radiometric Dating Reliable. I'll make sure to link that in the description box for people to check out. So me and Professor McQueen were both there. I moderated that one. So, okay, with that, George, I'm going to hand it over to you and to any critics in the chat as well. We want to make this interactive. So send me in some objections, questions, challenges, and we will engage them. Okay, George Bond, floor is yours, boss.
I want to share my screen, Donny. I've got a fair bit to show people. So
take your time. Okay, this is an important topic. So, and
Tommy, can you see that?
Yes, and I just want to put this comment up to be fair, because I do appreciate King Crocoduck's approach and professionalism to this topic. So he says he wants to hear about the radiation problem. That's what he specifically brought up during the debate. And as host, I will make sure that is engaged throughout the program. So, okay, George, we're going to hand it over to you. Go ahead.
Okay. May the Spirit of God open your eyes to the light, your ears to the truth, and your heart to His Son, the Lord Jesus Christ.
Amen.
In Matthew 7:8 says, "For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened." Now, I decided to concentrate a little bit on what KC had said. KC meaning King Crocoduck. I was watching a recent video from some European scientists about publishing negative results. So it was called Honesty in Science, Why Negative Results Matter. So I'm just going to play a very short video just to show you some of these statistics of what they're finding and why it's important that they, scientists actually publish even the negative results, which King Crocoduck mentioned that there aren't any. I mean, that's ridiculous. So I'll just play. It's only half a minute, by the way. Then I'll get back to. So I'll just let it go and see what happens. Tell me if the volume's okay, Donny.
No, I don't hear anything, George. Did you make sure that you clicked share audio when you shared screen?
No, probably not. I'll stop it.
Yeah. Let's
do you want me to start again?
Yeah, if you want to restart the video.
Yeah,
and then so when you click share screen or present, just make sure you click the share audio as well, and then that way
okay, take
that
two.
Way we'll be able to hear the video.
Share video. It just says share screen.
So when you click share screen.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
got it. All right.
There we
got
go.
it now. It's been a while since we've done this, isn't it? So, okay, let's go back to that video. Go back a little bit at just there.
Archive, and I checked the results. And actually, the good thing about that particular server is that it's divided on new results, confirmatory results, and contradictory results. And if you check contradictory results, they are increasing. It's great. And if you check confirmatory results, which are that boring things in which we do again something that has been reported before, they also increasing. But actually,
okay, there you go. There's some scientists who are really concerned about the fact that there are contradictory results that aren't being reported, and we know of so many instances of discordant radiometric dates that aren't recorded. I mean, King Crocoduck presented what was it, that funnel, or I'm not sure of the term he used, where he said, based on this statistical analysis, we can show that all the results comply and corroborate each other, etc., etc. I mean, with statistics, you'd like to see the data behind that. You want to see what was not presented and what was presented, because there's always cherry picking in statistical information and sample sizes, etc., etc. But another thing that David actually mentioned was that there are examples of materials with uranium but no lead, which Casey said he knew of no such examples. Well, here's one. You'll see that this is a mineral. This mineral is, I hope I don't butcher the word here, David, but this mineral is called ebenothite. Is that correct?
Yes, that's close enough.
Close
it's
enough.
A very,
all right.
Very unique mineral. Not common, I mean.
Yeah, so there is no need to turn over a rock to scientists who may intend to deceive you to have it dated. Instead, you be the scientist where the work of chemical analysis has already been done. Now, this information, I should add, comes from webmineral.com. It's not a creationist site. This is just pure scientific research that's published, and it's easily accessible from that website there. Okay, and you'll see there it says thousands of minerals are listed with a mass spectrometer chemical breakdown analysis showing the percentage of each element within the rock and the empirical formula for that mineral. Of these, 249 contain uranium, but only 38 contain uranium and lead. There are 514 minerals which contain lead, which includes the 38 I just mentioned, which also contain uranium. The percentages are expressed to 4 significant decimal places, meaning if no percentage for lead is listed, there would be less than 1 part per 10,000. So if we look at the ebenothite that I mentioned, you'll see it contains 45.77% uranium, but no appreciable quantity of lead. Why is this? This is the result. 4,577 parts per 10,000 uranium and less than 0.5 parts per 10,000 of lead. So if the Earth were 4.6 billion years old, then it should now contain slightly more lead than uranium. However, as I've underlined there, if the Earth is only about 6,000 years old, then only trace amounts of lead from decay would be found with the mineral. This corresponds with the reality of what is found. Of course, the old earthers, get a load of this, may conveniently claim that the 211 uranium-bearing minerals, which contain no appreciable quantity of lead, are extremely young, while the 38 minerals which do contain lead are old, but only 8 of those contain more lead than uranium. Now, this is the classic example of rescue device. They may also claim that lead leached out of the minerals, but that claim is not valid, and here's why. If the lead can leach out of these minerals, then it can leach from their sample rock, making determining a proper ratio of dating methods impossible. I've shown you previously with the from nuclear websites, and I think there was another nuclear engineer that they specifically looked at the leaching problem, and they found that uranium can leach out of samples. So Evo's admitted that the crystals. I won't mention his name, but he admitted that crystals are a closed system, that once they are formed, nothing can get in unless they are damaged, of which they can detect. I believe one of the rescue devices for zircon crystals is they have fine cracks which contaminated it. Now, I think David can speak on this subject because he's done a lot of work on zircon crystals. Maybe he'd like to comment on that particular later on. So the subject of the debate, which was radiometric dating is reliable, and I've said not. Here's a couple of examples I'm going to bring up. Now, before you get really nervy about copyright and whatever, I've spoken to Ian Juby just this morning, probably about an hour ago, and I asked him if I could use excerpts of some of his videos, and he said go for it. So Ian has given me permission to use those. But you'll notice in 1905 we knew the dinosaurs were 8 million years old. But in 1927, we knew the dinosaurs were 30 million years old. Hello. And in 1941, we knew the dinosaurs were 150 million years old. So this is how reliable their dating methods are, okay? But let's go to the first video. Hopefully I've got this one ready. Yeah. So if I play this video, let's just make sure I've got the timestamp correct. 3:40. Yeah. So let's go and listen to what some of these multiple dating methods have shown on a well-known geological feature known as the Grand Canyon.
160,000. Well, rubidium strontium isochron is supposed to be the most accurate of the methods, so let's go with that age. Oh. Did I mention that there's Indian artifacts in the lava flows, therefore we know the lava is actually 800 to 1,000 years old? Oops. This is certainly not an isolated case. A typical old Earth geologist will reply with contamination. Well, obviously we have the wrong answer, therefore the sample must have been contaminated. Wait a minute. That's shooting yourself in the foot. The only reason you are claiming contamination is because we found out the actual age of the rock based on archaeology after the fact. How about all those rock layers that we can't verify the age of, that you've assigned an age of millions, perhaps billions of years to? How can we trust those ages? Bottom line is, we can't. In fact, multiple modern lava flows have been dated using radio dating methods, and invariably they came back with ages of millions to billions of years. Obviously, something is horribly, horribly wrong. And by claiming contamination after the fact, you just demonstrated how quickly and easily you are willing to reject your own dates based on the scientific methods of radio dating, which give rock-solid ages. Wait a minute. Are the dating methods reliable or not? Talk about shooting yourself in the foot.
Okay, that's the first one, but I think the next one will show you some truths here. So hopefully I've got the timestamp on this one correct. Yep, here we go. This is only short snippet too.
Well, Hanky and the folks at the No Answers in Genesis website just couldn't contain themselves, and they wrote, oh, I love this. Considering that the half-life of potassium-40 is fairly long, 1,250 million years, the potassium-argon method cannot be used to date samples that are much younger than 6,000 years old. A few thousand years are not enough time for argon-40 to accumulate in a sample at high enough concentrations to be detected and quantified. Did these guys stop to think before they wrote? Did they not realize that they just admitted, in print, that if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, that their radio dating methods will give a wrong, incorrect age of millions, perhaps billions of years? Did they not realize that they just handed over the entire debate on a silver platter to a guy wearing a pot on his head? Oh, they really shot themselves in the foot this time. Plus,
this
their
is
claim
good.
gets more and
This
more
is good.
preposterous when you examine it. They said there was not enough time for argon to collect. Well, actually, that wasn't the problem. That's like saying this glass of water actually only has 1 drop of water in it. But the amount is so small that our scientific equipment, which is insanely expensive, can't read that small an amount. That's why it shows the glass falsely as being full when in fact it only has 1 drop. What school did these guys go to? If your scientific equipment can't read that small an amount, it's going to read an amount of 0, not a full glass. If the potassium argon method really worked, then it should show an age of 0 for the Mount St. Helens rocks, not many, many, many millions of years old. You've got it backwards, guys. Lastly, Henke just admitted in print one of the subtle assumptions you never hear about in radiometric dating, the assumption that the rock is millions of years old. Another subject you never hear brought up with radio dating is calibration. When a scientific method is developed, it is calibrated using known benchmarks. Well, when radio dating was invented, it was calibrated using the ages assigned to the rocks by evolutionary theory. Ages that were arbitrarily assigned. For example, in 1905, we knew that the dinosaurs were 8 million years old. In 1927, we knew that the dinosaurs were 30 million years old. In 1941, we knew that the dinosaurs were 150 million years old. Just as the ages of the dinosaurs and the rock layers that are in have changed over the years, so have the ages of the radio dating methods used to date those rocks. It's changed right along with our knowledge and what we know about the age of the rocks. If the radio date does not line up with the evolutionary assumptions, the radio date is assumed to be incorrect and it is thrown in the garbage. Radio dates are cherry-picked. It's just part of the system.
Okay, what I'll show you now is, just one second. These are actual examples here where they've tried multiple dating methods to get the dates of specific lava flows of known ages. And you can see there from potassium argon to rubidium, strontium, lead isochron, and rubidium, strontium, isochron ages. If you look at the lowest age there and the highest age there, and by the way, isochron ages are supposed to be the most accurate you can get, but you look at the difference between 10,000 2.6 billion years, that's a factor of, wait for it, 260,000. Okay, and what point that Ian was trying to make was, why don't we calibrate these scientific techniques, machines that they use with ages of rocks that we do know? Why don't they actually calibrate them against that, and rather than calibrate them around the geological column ages, which are guesses at best, which were invented way before any radiometric dating methods were proposed. Okay, here's another one where the Urankeryot lava flow, which comes from a volcano, dated at 1.5 million years old, while the Cardenas basalt at the Great Unconformity, you see that's the Great Unconformity, that's the Cardenas, that dated at 1,090 million years old. How can something that's considered 800 to 1,000 years old date to 1,500 million years old, and it's older than the Cardenas, which is supposed to be even older than that? But here's some practical examples that I think King Crocoduck should take note. Okay, this is recent. In 2005, British scientists reported that they dated footprints at 40,000 years old, a direct challenge to the traditionally accepted view that humans arrived in the Americas around 11,000 years ago. Now, subsequent paleomagnetic analysis and radioactive dating of the volcanic ash by American geologists put the date at 1.3 million years old. Now, here we go here. It's not as if they use one method and the other team used a different method. Listen to this. They engaged the best laboratories in Britain and Australia and used multiple dating methods on a range of different samples. radiocarbon dating using accelerator mass spectrometer of mollusk shells, okay, at the Oxford Radiation Accelerator Unit. The electron spin resonance dating on a mammoth molar by the Australian National University, and optically simulated luminescence dating on sediments and ash by Oxford University. And wait for it, apparently the bee's knees of dating methods, the argon dating method on ash and lava by the Open University, and uranium series dating on animal bones by Bristol University. So all these are pretty prestigious organizations, right? I think you'll agree. But listen, the head of the Berkeley Geochronology Center in California, Rene, clearly does not trust the dating done by the British team, nor does the British team trust the Berkeley work. I mean, these are independent tests that were done by independent bodies, and yet they got completely different answers. Something that's supposed to be, radiometric dating is valid and accurate. I mean, why are we getting all these different answers from multiple different methods by two different independent teams? It's ridiculous. And if you want to check that out, there's the reference, right? McQueen, footprints in Mexico created a scientific stir. Associated Press, Life Science, 5th of July, 2005. So it's not me. And rightfully, this eagle says, what? And of course, we all know how evolutionists end up with egg on their face on multiple fronts, junk DNA, etc., right? And I laugh at it. And this is what Ian Juvie was talking about. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. And if you want to find that's not just one example, by the way. There are multiple examples. Another one is the KBS Tuff or Skull 1470 discovered by Leakey. I'm not going to talk about that. You guys can do your own research on that. But if you want to read about it, I'll cite that paper that's there, and you can read it for yourself. And the amount of toing and froing they did to actually get a date that they were satisfied with. They just kept trying and trying until they got something that they agreed on, which
George,
isn't really science.
Excuse me, George. You think we could take a couple of questions before the 1 hour break?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that, David, before I got to get to Erica's argument with the coal subduction plates, and this is a paper that she actually presented, which I read, by the way, probably a month or two after it was actually published, and I laughed when I looked at it. But I'll talk about that a little bit later and why it's so silly to think that this paper debunks the cold slab arguments. So
okay, so we're going to do that.
I'll stop sharing and we'll take some questions.
Okay, so we'll do the cold slabs in the next section.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was able to go to my daughter's pots and pans, and I got one of those Ian Jubie pots to put on my head. A very clever man. Okay, what's the first question there, Donnie?
That'll protect you from anything, Professor McQueen. Okay, so these are going to be a couple criticisms for you. George King Crocoduck has sent them in, and I want him to at least feel like he's having his arguments engaged. I think you're doing an excellent job. And so here we go. First one comes in from KC. Thank you so much. He says, George, he's coming at you, George. So you better come in swinging, brother. So he's saying the problem that you're referring to is diagnosable by statistical tests like the one he shared during the debate. And that diagnosis came back negative. In case you don't remember, I think that had to do with the funnel plot analysis.
Funnel plot.
So we can have you both give your thoughts on that if you'd like to, gentlemen. George, start with you.
Well, I only present, we often hear the argument that radiometric dating is reliable and how various dating methods corroborate each other. You see, when it doesn't agree with their scenario, they come up with these silly arguments of diagnosable by statistical tests. Well, why don't you do that with all of them? I remember King Crocoduck presented, Mount Servius, was it? And that a date of 1,090 years or something like that was presented to apparently show that, hey, the date works. But what about all the other dating methods that were done that didn't get that date? They don't show those discordant dates. So that's all I've got to say. I mean, without
okay,
having,
I have a response to that. Good to see you, King, again. And I have begun my study of the funnel plot, and some of my creationist buddies that are mathematical statisticians, one of whom is named Dale Garrett. He's actually in Zimbabwe, Africa right now, and not readily available to me. He, in the weeks ahead, is going to help me to better understand this statistical issue. So for those of you in the audience that are listening to this discussion, you need to understand that I am a scientist. George is a scientist. King Crocoduck made it clear that he certainly is knowledgeable about the statistics and medical details regarding mammography as a biomedical physicist. And so we are a group of scientists looking at something. Is it surprising that we haven't already figured this out? Well, as George and I will point out in the second hour, there are some good statistical methods. There's some good physical evidence from physics that may provide a very reasonable explanation for where some of the heat problem goes. I'll leave that for next time. Donny?
David, the other thing, I showed multiple examples. I showed the footprint fiasco. I showed the KBS tuff. I showed multiple dating methods on the lava flows at Grand Canyon. Were they all statistical, errors?
No,
I mean, it seems like
I certainly agree with your critique. As early as 1985, I heard Dr. Steve Austin on the rim of the Grand Canyon, when we would lead tours together, talk about this very discrepancy between the different parts of the canyon, the lava flows and so forth, that end up with huge discrepancies between uranium lead, potassium argon, and so forth. And so the issue is one that I think you make a very good point about. Donny?
Yes, I appreciate the responses. Excellent job, gentlemen. Let me present this on screen since Casey has given us his time in the live chat to engage. George, what are your thoughts on this? Let's just pretend this is a debate. I'll pretend to be Casey. I'm coming at you, George, with a rebuttal. I still feel that George has misunderstood what funnel plots entail. If there's missing data, if data was arbitrarily excluded, the funnel plot will reveal it. How do you respond, George?
Well, he wants me to respond on something that I haven't seen. What data is that?
He's referring to the.
I
know that, but I want to see the data and where it came from.
Yeah,
I've done statistical analysis during my engineering course, and I can tell you there's lots of things that can go wrong with statistics, from the size of the sample, the questions that you ask, assumptions that you make, numbers of things. So without seeing all this data that he showed, I don't know. Where did you show the data? I don't remember. You showed a funnel, and that was it. There was no data there.
I think he says it was in the Dalrymple table, in the Dalrymple data.
I'll respond to that while George is thinking about Dalrymple and all the rest.
Yeah, go ahead.
The distinction between the analysis of the Dalrymple data that King did in the debate, between that and what George has argued about the Grand Canyon, is a difference that's in an entirely different category. What I mean by that is you can use the various methods, including isochron methods, to date some of the lava flows and some of the other units within the Grand Canyon. You go ahead and do the date. You use the statistical method even that King suggested. And then years later, you come back and they find Indian artifacts, American Indian artifacts, associated with these lava flows. Well, you have to pause there and say, regardless of what the funnel plot analysis might say, if you find some Clovis Point arrowheads in this basalt, it's got to date to a few thousands of years, not millions. What do you think of that, George?
Yeah, I agree. I was just reading a comment that King Crocoduck has made in the chat. I mean, I'm not here to debate you, mate. I've shown you a number of examples where various dating methods were used and they got wildly different dates, which really destroys the narrative that radiometric dating is reliable. I mean, that's totally silly. You got to be reasonable about this. It's not as if I said, there's the footprint fiasco and you say, oh, statistical analysis shows that that's not the case. I mean, there's multiple examples after examples that, I mean, the KBS tough, they kept dating things, kept getting different answers until they finally got one that agreed with what their scenario was. And I think in one example I know of, I think they had to resort to changing the actual decay constant to get that date. I mean, a constant is a constant. Why change the constant to get a date that you need?
Well,
so
George, I will build on your point there. The issue at stake here, and one that King and I discussed in our debate, and also is picked up upon with Erica in her discussion, is the important point of bias. And my argument, and I hope I made it clear in the debate, King, was that this is not like some Illuminati group that are controlling the number of labs. Erica, by the way, added carbon-14 labs into my number of labs. So the labs are not the number that Erica put, but whatever the number is, let's say they're 20 potassium, argon, uranium, lead labs in Europe and Australia. If you look at those and you look at this German guy that's running the lab, I'm not talking about the leadership, but a German guy, he comes up with a date of 6,000 years. Were he to show it to his boss as a legitimate result, he would lose his job. So his children wouldn't be able to buy a Volkswagen. He wouldn't be able to send them to college. And so if there's anything conspiratorial about this, it's the power of money in our modern society.
Donny, can you put up that last comment you had from King Crocoduck?
Yeah, that's the next one I wanted to address. And he's made some follow-up comments here. We'll try and get to those after, but this one's important because
okay,
we've
seen
this before. Yeah.
Just leave
let's
it there.
engage this one.
It says not enough time has passed for a substantial fraction of the parents to decay, so you end up dating residue instead of the sample. ENDGAME made the point, and it was an excellent point. Your dating methods then should show 0, not millions and billions of years, when the sample is only 800 to 1,000 years. I mean, it's what ENDGAME says. You're shooting yourself in the foot. If not enough time has passed for this substantial fraction of the parents to decay, then it should show 0. So why not calibrate your methods based on the dates that we know?
And we've only got 7 minutes left here, but let me add to the very good point that George makes. This issue of them dating a fraction that's residual somehow, not enough time has passed. See, this goes back to my point that, I started actually working around geologists in 1969, got my undergraduate degree in 1974. And in all of my years as a professional geologist, professor at Virginia State University, and all the things I've done, I've never actually been to a radiometric dating lab. I've never actually seen either how they do carbon-14 or, more importantly to me, how they do uranium lead, potassium argon, and so forth. There's a small group of people working in labs scattered worldwide. You may recall I told a story during the debate that when I was a visiting professor at the University of Zimbabwe, the department chairman had to send her samples to South Africa to be run by a lab. Why? There was no lab in the whole country of old Rhodesia, Zimbabwe to do it. So you have to understand that even for me as a professional geologist, coming up on now 45 or 50 years worth of experience, I've never actually seen it done. I've never actually seen how Dalrymple or some other senior scientist choose between minerals that are treated with hydrochloric acid and so forth. It's an extremely narrow and complicated point.
If I could jump in, Professor McQueen, for you too, how long then, therefore, does the evolutionary community say you have to wait before this rock can be tested?
I don't know the answer, Donny.
Well, I've heard in one case 100 years, and then in the case of I think a New Zealand lava rock, they said no, you got to wait 200 years. So it just keeps changing. I mean, how long do you wait? I mean, the rocks at the Urankaryot lava flows were, based on the artifacts, 800 to 1,000 years. So that's why I say, calibrate these dating methods or the techniques they use with the known dates, and let's see what results you get.
So this is the way I explain it. Here's my Casio watch that I bought to go on vacation. It's got a date on the back about when it was manufactured in the 21st century. Let's imagine that buried in a lava flow in Hawaii. We find my watch in that lava flow, and so we've got an objective date. If you find a 1955 Chevy, a famous American automobile, buried in a lava flow, you've got a date because you know when that 55 Chevy was made. But going on to the historicity of these Hawaiian lava flows that I've studied, the natives of Hawaii saw them in their history. Certainly when the European missionaries went over in the 1800s, they documented certain ones. So we do know when certain of these lava flows occurred, and that gives us a time mark, doesn't it, George?
Yeah, I mean that's a good analogy, David. Yeah, I mean I don't know how much longer you want us to spend on this. I would have thought it's quite clear that let's calibrate these methods with known ages, and let's see what they get. I guarantee you they won't do it because their whole narrative is based around the geological column, and they have to have millions and billions of years. It's as easy as that. If they don't get it, then they won't report it.
The film free here says, according to geologist Dr. Andrew Snelling, this specific basalt lavas have been dated with different methods, and vastly different ages were produced. So even with differing methods.
And that's a good comment from Neff, my friend. By the way, brother, I'm only about an hour's drive from you. I'll have to come over and we'll drink midnight coffee.
Coffee any time of the day. That's what I'm drinking here. Okay, what about this one? This one's for you, Professor McQueen. Comes in from Crimson Air. Is it reasonable to assume that many hydrothermal quartz specimens contain trapped water from Noah's flood?
That's a very good point. And that trapped water is called a fluid inclusion. And let me draw it on the whiteboard here. I worked around one of the senior scientists in my day at the United States Geological Survey, Edwin Roeder, I think was his name, who had studied these fluid inclusions in minerals such as quartz. And when you do a cross section, when you do a thin section and actually look at this, this is about 1 millimeter here. When you look at it, sometimes you will actually see a crystal. I should draw it as a cubic crystal there. My grandchildren are walking through here. The dog is saying hello. There's my extended family there.
Hello, everybody.
Here. Let me go on with this. And so this would be actually salt, NaCl. And then there will be fluids. Yeah, thank you if you leave those on. There are actually fluids that are in this crystal. And so what you do, the way you analyze this, is you heat this up. Let me move my screen down a bit so I can use the red color. What you do is you put a heat source underneath this, and you have thermometry, and you can see when the fluid that might have a bubble in it, when it goes to, say, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, you can tell the temperature. This is an excellent source for the 21st century flood geologists to look into, because the presence of this salt and the ability to measure the temperature provides some of the parameters that George and I are going to talk about when we talk about our model for the solution to the heat problem. That clear, Donny, you think?
Yes, very good. And from my understanding, we are dealing with the radiation issue in the second half, correct?
That's right. And the radiation issue is indeed tied in to what George and I have been talking about for a year about the issue of the heat, because the argument that King and also Erica have made is that if catastrophic plate tectonics is true, it generates not only a heat issue, but also would give off radiation that would kill everybody on the ark and all the fish in the sea. So we'll return to that next hour.
Okay, I appreciate it. George, unless there was any other comments you wanted to make, maybe we'll take the 10-minute break right now. I can cover a few things during that 10-minute break, and Professor McQueen will let you refill your coffee and get ready for part two.
Yeah, I need a coffee. A toilet break too.
Nope, not allowed, George.
Not
until you destroy the radiation issue.
I'll see you in 10 minutes.
Okay,
go ahead and
Professor
drop
McQueen.
my video, please.
We'll see you in 10 minutes. I'll cover a few things. George, we'll let you have your well-deserved bathroom break here, my brother. And what I'll do is I'm going to share a screen so I won't be able to see the chat. I won't touch on really the heat issue or radiation issue, because that's what George and Professor McQueen are going to be dealing with. But I do want to, actually, I may just touch on it briefly, but I'm going to go over a few points here, especially as it relates to dating methods in general, and give some of my thoughts. It's just going to be 10 minutes worth, basically, of I'm just looking at King Crocoduck's points here. Okay, I appreciate it. Feel free to explain, and we'll put it up on the screen for these gentlemen here. So me and Raw Matt, it is linked in the description box of this video. We did a show, I think it was last week. It's about an hour straight, and we gave our perspective on this issue. And I think we spent about half an hour straight, at least, on how we would deal with heat management. And so it was pretty thorough. I do recommend people check that out. I think it goes along nicely with this show as well. But I wanted to point to these lines of evidence that we can find directly in the rocks themselves, that I am currently unsatisfied basically with the answers or responses that have been provided to me from old Earth proponents. And those include fission tracks. Anybody who follows this channel knows I like to point to fission tracks, and of course radio halos, okay? Because these are microscopic areas of damage that we can observe directly in the rocks that are best explained by accelerated nuclear decay processes, which appear to invalidate the constant decay rate assumptions that typically the evolutionists have, okay? That's because these observed uniformitarian processes, they can't explain these scars, these microscopic areas of damage in the rocks. And the thing is, there's an abundance of these scars found in granite rock formations all around the earth, okay? But one specific point pertaining to the radiometric dating argument in general is radiocarbon. Okay, and we've pointed out on this channel, we've done show after show. We had Dr. Charles Jackson here about a year ago. Dr. Jackson and I, we went over for a couple hours basically all the responses, the most technical responses that the uniformitarians or actualists have put forth to save the day for this issue. But the most basic question, okay, for those in the audience to comprehend is, if radiocarbon lasts only for a few 100,000 years, why do we find detectable levels of radiocarbon in samples that are supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old to billions of years old in the case of diamonds, okay? Because we find detectable levels of radiocarbon in diamonds, which are the hardest substance on this earth. They're formed deep within the earth. Therefore, they are essentially resistant to cosmic ray bombardment in the atmosphere. And so the radiocarbon must be intrinsic to the diamond, okay? We find it in coal, fossilized wood, fossils. And the thing is, carbon decays so quickly that if every single atom in the universe was made of carbon, it would all easily decay in 500,000 to, let's say, 1 million years. Okay, for sake of argument, we'll say 1 million years. It should have all been decayed. And yet we find detectable levels, and this is repeatable. This is testable. This is repeatable. This is observable. This is empirical. We find detectable levels of this radiocarbon in fossils, coal, oil, diamonds. And the fact that we find radiocarbon in all sorts of these samples, including fossilized wood, and the RATE team specifically, a group of scientists, they've sent all these sorts of samples off to different labs to be tested. And these samples, as we've explained in the past, range from tens of millions to hundreds of millions of years old. Yet they came back with fairly young ages. And so their rescue devices, this is just going to be in a nutshell. We've done full shows on this, but the rescue devices that come to mind, specifically the most common ones, are contamination. So they'll say, maybe these samples were contaminated. But here's the thing, that doesn't work either, because these have been looked at. These results have been repeated. These samples are subjected to harsh treatments in acids. Okay, and so the samples should go in basically with no contamination. Okay, because these are harsh treatments that they're subjected to. It's looked at. Plus, it's repeated. So it can't just always be contamination since these tests are repeated. But the big one is that you'll find from more of the up-to-date, I guess, evolutionists or old earthers, is they'll say that there's other nuclear material down in the rocks where the diamonds are that can essentially recharge the C14. But again, that doesn't work. This has been looked at by a number of scientists, and they actually estimated that you would need over 13,000 times more nuclear material in the nearby rocks to sufficiently recharge the C14. That means you would need far too much material to recharge the C14. And as we know, the cosmic rays in the atmosphere, they can't reach deep down within the earth. So contamination doesn't work, right? The acids that they're using, basically subjecting to these that these samples are being subjected to, these acids will literally dissolve anything. These samples are hit with multiple treatments. And so we can be confident, guys, we can be confident that only carbon intrinsic to the sample ends up in the instrument to be measured. Okay, so we have this problem for radiometric dating that shows it's unreliable with radiocarbon. We also have the existence, as I put it earlier, of fission tracks and radio halos specifically. We could even get into helium, but I think fission tracks and radio halos are more undeniable because the rescue devices I find just don't work. And that's observable evidence directly in the rocks that accelerated decay has occurred. Okay, so one basic argument you could look at, this is the last thing I'll say. I'm guessing our guests are back. I can't see because I'm screen shared, so I'll say this, okay?
I'm here.
Okay, perfect. So the fact that we actually have, here's the last thing I want to point. I think this is an important point, and this is one way to approach it, okay? There must be a solution to the heat problem and radiation problem, okay? There must be some kind of supercooling mechanism because we see these scars, fission tracks and radio halos, but we understand that these scars are obliterated at relatively low temperatures. Okay, so whether these scars are from creation, the accelerated creation week, or the flood, or both, it doesn't matter. The point is that they're there, but they shouldn't be there if there was no solution to this so-called heat problem. Now, we know nuclear decay was accelerated because of the existence of these scars in the rocks. But yet they wouldn't exist because they are obliterated at relatively low temperatures, okay? And Dr. Andrew Snelling, he's pointed out in an interview before that you can look, there's an example in Los Alamos, okay, where they had a drill hole and they noticed as you go down, you go through granite, and that's where you can find these scars, okay? These scars are observed, they're documented, but the further you go down, the in situ temperature increases. And when you get to about 150 degrees Celsius, you know what happens? The radio halos start to fade. They disappear. That's because the heat has energized the crystal to the point where the particles of the crystalline structure, they've actually repaired itself. And so if there was this massive amount of heat and radiation produced that we have no cooling mechanism for or no explanation for, guess what? These scars wouldn't exist, but they do exist. And that is a fact. That is an observation that the evolutionary community has to deal with. And Professor McQueen, good to have you back, brother.
Yes.
Donny,
May I suggest? Go ahead.
Can I add something to that, Donny? According to the secular narrative on the formation of granite, apparently, as we all know, that the Earth started off as a molten ball of rock. This would have included the granite, and but today, when you heat up granite and allow it to cool, it becomes rhyolite. So their rescue device there is it cooled slowly over millions of years. Now, is that scientific? You can't test that, but from our point of view, let's take their explanation as correct. Okay, we can empirically test that granite is composed of certain minerals like quartz, feldspar, mica, hornblende.
Yes, that's correct.
And they all have different densities. Now, if the granite was once molten and it cooled slowly over millions and millions of years, you'd expect those minerals to actually settle in respective to their individual densities. But we don't find that. So their narrative of granite being molten and cooling over millions of years is baloney, because if it did, you'd see that in the various densities of the crystals that actually make up the granite.
Donny, let me make a suggestion here. Let me take 10 minutes to present one of my arguments, and then knock it over to George for a 20-minute further look at this issue of radiation and so forth. And then we'll go to Q&A. Is that a reasonable style for the last hour?
That works, Professor McQueen. And what I'll say before we begin this next and final hour, part 2 of this excellent discussion, people are saying it's very helpful. I want to put this up on screen. Casey has reiterated his basic point here on the radiation problem, and that'll help us basically set the foundation for what you and George are going to discuss. So he believes, and then obviously I think these points are going to be addressed in your presentations and then the Q&A. So he says the radiation problem stays with or without the CPT model, and he says he'll elaborate. The creationist timeline is 800,000 roughly times as short as the scientific one. As a result, the activity of the radioisotopes must have accelerated by that factor. And he's saying this produces the radiation problem, and the annual background radiation is 0.62 rem per year. And he's basically saying that would produce a dosage that is lethal. As in everything on the earth dies, including Noah and the ark animals. And so with that presented, we'll move into part 2 here.
Let me take my 10 minutes and answer that specific question. Let's see how I want to begin with this. King is wrong on that point. And the reason that he's wrong on that point is this. When you look at the issue of catastrophic plate tectonics, and you look at it worldwide, let me get the bat dog's cape out here and get it turned to be able to see the map here. Here we have a map of Africa. Hope you can see Africa there. And then if I unfold this fabric map, we get to the Americas. I want to go the other way. And then here we get to the Indian area, Africa, and so forth. If you look at the world map, and you look at where we see in our modern world, and I'll take only one since I've got 10 minutes. Let's start with the issue of the Hawaiian Islands, which are right here on the world map. There is underneath that part of the Pacific Ocean an area that George and I have researched over the last year that looks like this. Here, I will draw a ship to indicate that I'm drawing a cross section. Here is the water underneath a ship near the Hawaiian Islands. And then we come down to the crust mantle boundary. We'll call this the mantle, and this is the beginning of the crust. In the area of Hawaii, there are identifiable, using modern geophysics, blobs, B-L-O-B-S, blobs that are moving up underneath that area. Erica has complimented me, I think, on my use of paper towel rolls like this to illustrate this blob moving up. Now, why would that be significant? Let me make sure I set my timer here so I can see how much time I've got left. Why would that be significant? Why is that such a big deal? Well, the reason that is such a big deal is because of the differential equation that controls some very important factors as that lava is moving up. And I'm not going to go through all this. You can go back to my debate with Luca in Italy to see the full details. But the part I want to emphasize right now is that epsilon dot, this rate of deformation by creep, is a very important scientific factor. Creep is a exponent of those two factors there. But notice what U sub 0 is and KT. Well, U sub 0 is the activation energy that it takes in mantle creep. And so let's go back to this diagram. We are talking about these blobs moving from the mantle up into the crust. And so this is germane. Now, if you work through, now remember we're talking about a differential equation here. So you got to think backwards on this thing. If you work back with a small sigma, and sigma comes into the equation, where does sigma come into the equation? I'm sorry. If you're doing it at a small mathematical difference, then this differential equation becomes what is called mathematically insufficient. And it actually allows for catastrophic plate tectonics. Now, how does that tie in to what I just said here? How much do I have left in my 10 minutes, Donny? Please, I'm losing track here.
Oh, no worries, Professor McQueen. You take as much time as you need. You've still got several minutes. So
okay, good.
You feel comfortable, even if you take a couple minutes over, that's fine.
Well, that's kind of you. So how does this tie into a critique of what Crocoduck is saying? It ties in this way, that if you look at this reference by the Australian scientist Stacy on page 2203, you will see there that mantle creep, which is occurring, I'll use a different color. This mantle creep, which is occurring down in this area as the blob moves up, under a certain set of circumstances, that mantle creep can not only explain the movement of the blob up, I haven't worked out the full mathematics yet, but it also can explain a heat sink. And so when we're taking this analogy of the modern blob and putting it over into catastrophic plate tectonics, and I'll use my two notebooks here as an example. And so we're talking about catastrophic plate tectonics, where we have an example of, let's say, the California coast in the United States, where there is a hot boundary. I'm sorry, not hot boundary. You have a boundary where a cold slab, which is this book, is going underneath the crust. That goes in catastrophically at a very high rate, and it's in the upper part of the crust as a cold slab. Now, were the Earth 5 billion years old. And were this subduction occurring, let's say, 1 billion years ago, why would these rocks at depth still remain a cold slab? Now, we've been repeatedly challenged tonight by Crocoduck to tie in the heat issue to the radiation issue. And it's a point well taken, because in this situation, of a plate boundary, with our argument that here we have California, and here we have the Pacific Ocean subducting underneath that. So now we can make it a cross section to look like this, where here's the tree indicating this is California, and this is that subducting group. How come, if the Earth, it really is as old as King Crocoduck and Erica say it is, how come these are cold? Is it not true from the simplest algebra of the second law of thermodynamics that heat cannot of itself pass from a colder to a hotter body? And if you calculate that heat in joules and imagine the radiation being given off from it, this hot crust versus cold crust argument works in the favor of creationism, young Earth, not in the direction of an old evolutionary view. George and I have talked about this on a number of occasions, so I'd like to yield the rest of my time to George, please.
Okay, appreciate it there. Professor McQueen, as always, love the visuals. And do you want here? I think, George, you're going to be going in depth here, but let me put this up, Professor McQueen, just to be fair, give you the chance to respond. He's King Crocoduck's pointing out that he's specifically talking about ionizing radiation that doesn't have to do with heat. And so he was wondering your thoughts on the excess radiation rather than the heat itself. Do you have any thoughts on that, brother?
Oh, of course. I almost don't know where to begin. Let's try it this way. You simply cannot disconnect the physics of an enormous amount of heat being generated in catastrophic plate tectonics. The amount of heat being generated is where you get this ionization, and you've got this radiation coming up. You know, he is very conversant with the units that are used in mammography and X-ray medical issues, you know, and so you get a certain number of rem, which can be converted to angstroms and all kinds of other units of energy. You get a certain number of rem, and if you get a high enough rem, everybody on the ark and everybody on the in the ocean die. So I'm saying no. There is a link between the issue of heat and the issue of ionizing radiation. George, pick it up from there, my friend.
Gentlemen, I'd be curious as to your thoughts. I just want to add this, and I presented this to KC in the chat. I engaged in a formal debate, I think it was about 2 years ago now, with Erica, our favorite evolutionist, Gutsy Gibbon here. Time flies. And I pointed out when she brought up the heat problem that the massive amounts, the miles and miles worth of water at the flood on the earth during this time could have shielded Noah and the animals from this excess heat or excess radiation, Because correct me if I'm wrong, George and Professor McQueen, don't we use water in nuclear reactors to protect and shield things from damage?
Oh yeah, for
Yes,
sure.
definitely. Yeah.
But I guess
And
they would say that the amount of water on the earth at the time of the flood would still not be enough, basically, to shield. I'm guessing that would be their response. Yeah, go ahead.
if you go back and look at my debate with Luca, one of the things that we agreed to return to in February or March of the coming year was the issue of what are the parameters that we're putting on catastrophic plate tectonics. And I've been working on that some. Some of the hottest lavas that erupt in the modern day are Hawaiian lavas. And I would say the temperature of the fountains of the Great Deep would be around 2,000 degrees. And when you get that high, it doesn't matter whether it's centigrade or Fahrenheit. Luca also challenged me to begin thinking in terms on what would be the maximum depth of the water of the flood. And in a model I've been working on for many years, the highest mountain that would have been covered by the floodwaters would be at a depth of 10,000 feet. And so I would suggest to the audience that if you want to begin looking at the parameters of what's the temperature of the lavas, what's the maximum depth above Noah's Ark, let's start with 10,000 feet. And I would say that the amount of heavy water, which I think is what's used in a nuclear reactor maybe, or maybe just ordinary water, I have to think about that. The amount of water involved in a nuclear reactor is a lot less than a column 10,000 feet high. George, I'll turn it over to you now, my friend.
Okay, thanks for that, Donny. I'm just going to share the screen again. I'm going to try and cover this quite quickly because otherwise we'll be here for 3.5 to 4 hours. Just go back to my document. So
take your time, brother. I'm looking forward to this. So just take your time.
So just before we get on to the heat problem, addressing some of Crocoduck's questions, Erica presented this paper in one of her streams as a possible, or not a possible, but a solution to the cold slab subduction. As I said previously, I read this paper shortly after it actually came out, and really, when you look into it and actually read it, it's nothing but a model that's full of assumptions, and even they admit it, and it's limited to 60 to 100 kilometers, not the 700 kilometers that these subduction zones are detailed to protrude into the mantle. But you can see some of the temperature differences. Originally, they said it was around 1,260 degrees Fahrenheit, but further studies have actually shown it to be more like 3,000 degrees difference. Now, keep in mind the mantle, which is this bit here, 2,900 kilometers. These subduction zones go in 700 kilometers, okay? So it's a substantial depth that they actually protrude into the mantle. Now, I'll talk about the heat budget a little bit later, but this is effectively the paper. Right from the outset, they said, yet we lack a robust understanding of how thermal structure develops over a subduction zone's lifetime. And then they go on to actually produce a model that can explain it. But you'll see straight from the start, may have dynamic origin. So they're speculating already. Okay, so because these approaches impose slab and plate properties, they are unable to, this is quoting from the paper, by the way, are unable to investigate the time dependence of subduction zone thermal structure and associated non-steady state effects. within the framework that permits the slabs, the slab, the plates and mantle wedge to co-evolve in a dynamic, consistent manner. So look, I'm just going to leave it like that, and you can take screenshots and read it yourself, but you'll find that there's a lot of uncertainty. And one of the things you must note that even they actually are appealing to adiabatic temperature gradients. I'll talk about that a little bit later with the heat problem. But going on, you'll say the paper says may vary substantially. That's their results. May vary substantially in nature's slab crust and lower mantle viscosity. To investigate these properties, we focus on the slab MIHO and slab temperatures as relatively shallow depths of 60 to 100 kilometers, which I mentioned earlier. So it says these tests are motivated by considerable uncertainty regarding the physical mechanisms responsible for down-dip decoupling to coupling transition. And it says, however, such approaches are unable to ensure that the slab plates and mantle wedge co-evolve in dynamic, consistent manner. The order of 100 kilometers, which presents an issue for the later stages of such models where the DD increases to substantially greater than 100 kilometers. As I said, the subduction plates are down to 700 kilometers. And you'll see that due to the generic nature of our models, it is inappropriate to use this model as a direct proxy for any specific Earth subduction zone. I talk about, the subduction rates and likely, and you see straight from the start, they talk about millions of years. And they'll use words like likely. So there's more likely and assume, more speculation and conjecture. So, and they talk about the temperatures. They talk to a depth of a slab of 88 kilometers, and for the 1300 degree isotherm, the depth is 101 kilometers. So there's the 60 to 100 kilometer limitation. So even they then list the limitations of their approach. It states, these are their words, not mine. To target first order relations, we neglect a number of processes that impact subduction zone thermal structure. And there they are there. Heat transport, mantle flow in the third dimension, the melt and fluid flow have both been shown to exert a control in previous studies. So here we go. It is with these simplifications in mind that we have focused on relative temperature variations as a function of time, as opposed to absolute temperatures. We speculate that most of these complexities will increase the time dependence of subduction zone thermal structure. As we progress to applying dynamic models to the thermal structure of specific subduction zones, an assessment of the importance of such complexities within a particular setting will be critical. Okay, so really, that paper is a model, a simplified model with lots of assumptions to get the answer that they want. And as I said, they talk about millions of years before they even start to look at it. Now, just to go back up again. Okay, so I did some pretty rough calculations because I don't know the full specifics of the volume of these subduction plates, but my calculations show that this material that's subducting into the mantle should reach thermal equilibrium within 290,000 years, actually 29,000 to 290,000, as I said, based on the assumptions that I put in, because I don't know all the bits and bits about it. But you can see that that coal subduction plate should not exist. And they're talking about, look at where the 100 kilometer mark is, right up the top there, right? They're talking about that bit. Their model concentrates there. Nothing about the fact that these things extend to 700 kilometers. Okay, with the heat problem. All right, here we go. Something we should understand about this is the Earth's energy budget, which effectively says the amount of heat a surface radiates is proportional to the fourth power of its temperature. With temperature, if temperature doubles, radiated energy increases by a factor of 16. That is 2 to the fourth power. All right, that's 16. 2 by 2 by 2 by 2. If the temperature of the Earth rises, the planet rapidly emits an increasing amount of heat to space. Okay, so that's a bit about it, but notice I've put down a bit of a definition here. So let me explain. Let's explain this heat solution that we're proposing is a hypothesis. Okay, it's a hypothesis. It's not a theory. It's not a fact. It's a hypothesis that we're investigating. Yes, we haven't worked out all the physics, but there may be geophysics mechanisms we don't yet understand or are aware of. And I'll explain that even a bit later. The physicists themselves admit that. For example, the hotter and denser blobs were unknown 50 years ago, and were not, and nor were the cold subduction slabs. These and other findings fit with the creation of young Earth confirming the Bible. Not the old Earth narrative, but the young Earth narrative. We've got no problem explaining these subduction plates and the hot blobs. Okay. Now, one of the things you've got to understand is you'll hear this adiabatic, which I mentioned a little bit earlier in that model. Adiabatic means it's relating to or denoting a process or condition in which heat does not enter or leave the system concerned. So the reason I put that is because many may not know. I'm not sure if King Crocoduck knows about the Z-pinch experiments, but this is from the Journal of Applied Physics with Z-pinch fusion, published on the 27th of May 2020. So it's fairly recent. And I'll actually go to the original Z-pinch experiments done in the Ukraine a bit later. So you can see there. New efforts funded by the US Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy, are currently being initiated that will develop simulation and diagnostic capabilities for Z-pinch. These capabilities are expected to improve scientific understanding and to accelerate progress towards a viable compact fusion concept. So we still don't understand it completely, is my point. And even physicists are admitting to that. It even states that Z-pinch has produced intriguing scientific results, and I'll cite some of those a little bit later. Aligned with this goal are several research topics and open questions that define the future directions of the Z-pinch. So, as I said, they're still doing research on this. They don't know all the answers, and as I said earlier, neither do we. We don't make the assertion that we know all the answers. Okay. There are many topics that need further investigation, and that's what I said as well, that we need to wait and see what happens with this new research and where it takes us. There are things there that we don't understand that we may understand, maybe not in our lifetime, but maybe it's around the corner. Who knows? I don't know the answer to that. So you see, through many questions, though many questions remain unanswered about the behaviour of the Z-pinch, so they actually agree as well. So there's a citation. That's the paper. They make reference to a couple other papers regarding kinetic simulations of the dense plasma. And here's one that talks about the radiation. However, the details of the neutron production are not fully understood, and past optimization efforts of these devices have been largely empirical. So here's another paper I read just this morning, actually, from the American Institute of Physics. It says refinement of the methods described here is in progress to address multiple issues for radiation science. KC, we don't know much about the radiation. You're just making a lot of assumptions that, hey, the ionization is going to fry everyone to death. We don't know that. We just don't know that. And as I said about the experiments in the Ukraine, this is Dr. Stanislav Adamenko, who is the initiator, or I'm assuming that he actually came up with the proton 21 solid state nuclear fusion experiments, that is the Z-pinch. And you'll see that over the course of several months, we determined that up to 20% of the mass in the target sample underwent nuclear transmutation into a variety of elements not found in the original sample. What that's saying is you start off with a specific sample, you zap it, with a high concentration laser beam. And what's produced is 20% of the mass in the target underwent nucleation into a variety of elements not found in that original sample. But what they also find say is after several hundred analytical studies of measuring the post-experimental composition of our target samples, it became clear that the statistical mean curve of the abundance of chemical elements created in experiments are close to those characteristic in the Earth's crust. What that's saying is they actually created super heavy elements with parent to daughter ratios similar to the characteristics in the Earth's crust. And they go on to say, in the following normal procedures for interpreting the images of the ion microprobe, we can only conclude that in the case of these anomalous black spots, not only are they not composed of any known chemical elements, but they are also not composed of any type of previously undiscovered heavier elements. They actually found heavy elements that we don't know of. They have a very short half-life and they disintegrate within a few seconds. But going on to talk about the blobs that David mentioned, these are massive blobs. There's one under, I think, Africa. I think the continent of Africa is there, if you can see it in grey, just there. And I think there's another massive one out in the Pacific somewhere. And these are, by the way, from secular publications. So you can see these hot blobs effectively come from the inner core, and they run through what they call these cusps or branches through the mantle over to the crust surface, cooling in the process. So just to give you a bit of rundown on my calculations on the mantle being the I guess the depository for all this heat. I've done some calculations based on the mass of the mantle. I looked at the temperature of the mantle, and let's be up front, right? No one, secular or creationist, can tell you what the temperature of the mantle was, say 4.5, 6,000 or 10,000 years ago. I'm up front. I've made an assumption that if the average temperature of the mantle was 400 degrees lower, and let's say we actually increased it by 400 degrees centigrade, the amount of heat absorption that mantle can contain is 1.4 by 10 to the 30th joule. Now, I don't know if you remember the figure that was quoted by a specific person was 1.51 by 10 to the 30th joule, which some say was the heat generated by accelerated nuclear decay. Now, compare that, 1.4 versus 1.51, and that's just the mantle, okay? When you look at a summary of the other materials in the crust, the water, the gas, the oil, I wasn't able to determine the amount absorbed by any gas or air. The salt domes, for example. Oh, sorry, I did do the air, the water, the crustal basalt, the crustal granite, and the total mantle for a 400 degree centigrade increase. You get a total of 1.74 times to the 30th power versus that 1.5, well in excess of the heat generated during nuclear decay, accelerated nuclear decay. So if we adopt 350 degrees, you can see there that the figure then correctly relates to 1.52 versus 1.51. So when we combine the total heat absorbed by the water and the mantle, for example, in the 350 degree increase in the temperature in the mantle, that's pretty much 100% of that heat is absorbed by the mantle and the crust. Now, one thing I'll be upfront and say, we don't yet know how that heat transfer occurred. We don't have the physics at the moment. As I said with the Z-pinch experiments, they still don't understand all the intricacies of those experiments that they did. In future, there may be new physics or new processes that can put some light into that. But at the moment, we've got some. Our contention is that those blobs that you saw earlier were actually remnants of that heat absorbed in the mantle. And
Excuse me, George.
Just let me finish, David. Just 1 minute.
Okay, no problem.
We also make the contention that there's nothing that can prevent us from saying that these super heavy elements could have been created during creation week, as the Bible says. I think David mentioned it in his opening remarks. In the first 2 days, all these super heavy elements could have been created deep down into the earth. And as the Bible says, during the flood, the depths. What's the terminology? The waters of the deep, or the opened up. I mean, there would have been lavas, all sorts of things that would have been washed off and broken up by the forces of the water, and distributed into the continents. And when you look at the actual distribution of the radioactive elements in the continents, you'll find that 90% of the radioactive elements are actually contained in the dry continents. Okay, so that adds to our contention that the sedimentary action deposited these super heavy elements into the continents via the mantle and core. But I'll stop there. But I want to just say is I'm going to introduce you to secular heat problems that they don't address. They simply hand wave it away, and they just keep going about the heat problem that creationists have. You know,
they do.
You've got a heat problem. Hey, how about the multiple heat problems that you have that you can't address?
Yeah, you're
on one. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, your point's well taken. You know, Bob Gentry, that I've spoken about on numerous occasions, in part at Oak Ridge National Labs, was looking into the evidence for super heavy elements in what he called giant halos. Excellent summary, George. I need to leave the chat in 5 minutes. May I go ahead, Donny, and give my 5-minute summary and bid you guys a good further discussion?
Absolutely. This is what we'll do, Professor McQueen. We're going to give you your 5-minute summary. I've saved a number of questions from the chat that we can have George engage, or even myself afterwards. George, if you want to spend a few minutes going over in a nutshell the secular heat problems, I did link your guys' 2-hour video in the description box for people to check out on that for a more comprehensive program pertaining to that issue. And so, yes, David, I'm going to give you the floor for now, 5 minutes, and then we'll proceed that way. Go ahead, David.
Okay, good. I hope those of you that have been watching this can see the difference in style between George and myself. I like to focus on the big picture, as simple a summary as you can. But some things you simply have to understand algebra, calculus, and even differential equations to be able to get to. Sometimes in my treatment of these issues, like you see on the whiteboard behind me, of trying to figure out a temperature of around 2,000 degrees, or estimating the depth of the floodwaters at 10,000 feet. These are ideas that I've had for years. And sometimes as I try to simplify things, I blur what my colleague George has made so clear tonight, the difference between a fact. Granite does consist of quartz, feldspar, potassium feldspar, biotite, hematite. That's a fact. A hypothesis, and then a theory. And I appreciate his distinction in that regard. I want to end my part going back to Scripture and always reminding myself that as my friendship with King Crocoduck grows and Erica, and the opportunity of debating them in February and March of next year, I do view it, in all honesty, as a growing friendship. Now, am I ignorant of the fact that they fundamentally disagree with me and George? Of course not. The old Earth versus the young Earth view, the creationist view versus the evolutionary view, have tremendous implications. Those of you that are students of the Bible know that the Bible is divided into two broad parts. The Old Testament, then there's a 400-year gap, and then the events of the New Testament began around 2,000 years ago. Well, the last book included in the canon is the book of Malachi. For those of you in Italy, like Luca, you would pronounce it Malachi, but it's actually Malachi, I think, is the Hebrew pronunciation. The last chapter of Malachi reads this way. This is from the New Living Translation. The Lord of Heaven's armies says, the day of judgment is coming, burning like a furnace. On that day, the arrogant and the wicked will be burned up like straw. Now, I have to pause here for self-analysis. Am I arrogant in the way that I view young earth creationism? The actual last couple of verses of the Old Testament reads this way. Remember to obey the law of Moses, my servant. Keep in mind that Moses and other individuals had access to documents, according to Dr. Henry Morris, from Adam and Seth and Noah, Joseph, Abraham. He had access to all these documents, written documents, from which he could compile what the Orthodox call the Torah, or Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so the comment about Moses here has a creationist side to it, but let me read on. All the decrees and regulations that I gave him on Mount Sinai for all Israel. Look, I'm sending you the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord arrives. His preaching will turn the hearts of fathers to their children and the hearts of children to their fathers. Otherwise, I will come and strike the land with a curse. Kind of a sobering thought at the end of that passage, isn't it? That if we're not sensitive to what the Ten Commandments say, part of which is the fact that we take a Sabbath rest or a day of rest every 7, is based on the fact that God rested after the 7 days of creation. These have tremendous implications. And so as I leave you tonight, I want to leave you with the idea of the need, the necessity of mutual love, not only from Standing for Truth, Donny, George, me, but also for those that disagree with us. Thank you very much, and I'll bid you good night.
Professor McQueen, thank you so much. As always, 2 hours flies by. I love these kinds of shows. I was saying earlier, it's like, SFT live video peer review, where we can address the critics and basically strengthen our model and work on these problems, these very important problems. Yeah. So Professor McQueen, God bless
George,
you. God bless your family.
George, once again, my friend, wonderful job, and we will talk next week.
God bless, David.
I am out of here.
God bless, Batman, and we'll see you soon. Make sure
That's
you
right. Gotham must be defended from the Jokers and the Penguins.
You've got a full night of superhero saving of the day there, Professor McQueen. Okay, so with that, George, I want to ask you a couple questions. But first, I also want to point out a couple things here. Let me get, okay, we're good. We discussed this before. If you were to put the acceleration, the accelerated decay at mostly creation, but some at the flood, we could assume that if it was at creation week was an accelerated week anyways. We've pointed out before that it's kind of like it's a time lapse, right? Correct. That you see in video form where everything is accelerated in terms of processes. There's two events in the history of the world where we would have that, where it's not like we would see today in terms of what we're observing. That'd be the creation week and obviously the flood year. But let's just focus on creation, okay? We have all natural processes being accelerated, okay? Firstly, and I focus on genetics and biology. That's what I work on. That's why I've written a book on ERVs. And so the problems associated with genetics, that's what I specifically work on, while we have you and Professor McQueen working on this. I love genetics, especially because it's observable, it's real time, genes, traits, and genetics. That's what's inherited sperm and egg. And I think that's the best way to answer the question of ancestry. When it comes to a lot of the historical science, like we're dealing with today, there is a lot of hypothesizing. Okay, George, and you've made that clear that we're doing a lot of hypothesizing. Now, at creation week, we'd have all of these natural processes greatly accelerated, including, and where I was going with Adam and Eve, is they would be created not genetically homogeneous. That wouldn't make any sense for God's command to be fruitful and multiply. They would be created genetically heterozygous in a state of DNA diversity. That would make sense of God's command to be fruitful and multiply. So if scientists came along an hour after creation and did genetic sequencing analyses on Adam and Eve's DNA, they would see DNA differences within themselves and between, and they would conclude that these DNA differences were inherited from past common ancestors, even though they were just created. Okay. And since this applies across the biological world, we'd actually see nested hierarchical patterns in the nuclear DNA specifically, where we would have DNA differences, where they would conclude past relationships, descent with modification, evolutionary history, where it actually would not be the case. Well, when it comes to the created rocks and how this applies, I'm applying my study into genetics into rocks and radiometric dating and geology. Okay, so George, you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong here. But my thoughts are, in the same way that we have pre-existing DNA differences in Adam, Eve, and the created kinds, we'd also have chlorophyll in the original leaves on the original trees. And we would also have, let's say we had amounts of uranium and lead in the original rocks. Why wouldn't that be the case? Your geologists, or those fluent in radiometric dating, would conclude that this lead came from the decay of uranium, the parent element, essentially, to the daughter element, when that wouldn't be the case. But at creation, this accelerated or rapid radioisotope decay during this week, okay, would also mean that the amount of heat dissipation follows along with it. And so what we have is heat produced, but also rapid cooling of this heat, and possibly even radiation dissipation, okay? Rapid radiation dissipation as we have the excess radiation being created, okay? If you put this into the creation week, that makes sense. It's a supernatural event anyways. Okay, so in other words, the rate of heat and radiation dissipation or removal is relative to the rate of radioisotope decay. And so creation week would consist of the acceleration of all natural processes, like a time lapse, but where you have radioisotope decay accelerated, you also have the supercooling with it, or the rapid removal of excess radiation with it, if it's happening during the creation week. Now, firstly, we'll get your thoughts on that, George, but my question to you, based on what you were saying earlier, and I want to understand your position here that you're laying out as a possibility correctly. Are you saying we'd have these elements created deep within the earth at creation, but during the flood, due to the catastrophic processes at the flood, the plate movements, for example, the fountains of the great deep breaking up, the worldwide volcanic activity, these elements that are there they're pre-existing, they're in the earth, but they're deep within the earth, not affecting the original creation, they would then be manifested and come to the forefront. So rather than accelerated decay, they're basically just coming up from pre-existing rocks. Go ahead.
That's a good analogy. Let's not forget God created Adam and Eve as mature adults, created trees, herb-bearing grasses and etc. mature as well, because you need that to provide food for the creatures that he created in the rest of the creation week. As far as, yes, it's a possibility that these super heavy elements may have been formed deep into the earth during the first 2 days of creation. And as you mentioned about the fountains of the great deep opening up, these elements may have then been distributed across the various dry land continents. And it's consistent with what we find, as I said, that 90% of the radioactive elements are found on the dry continents. Okay, but to address the issue of the radiation, I mean, I don't know how many times I have to say this to King Crocoduck, but we know from Z-pinch experiments that we can create these super heavy elements in a very short time. Okay. There are experiments that have verified that, and there are experiments at the moment, and I quoted a couple of people like the Schmidt-Tang et al. Paper, the Schmidt-Link et al. Paper, which says, however, the details of the neutron production are not fully understood, and past optimization efforts of these devices have been largely empirical. And in another paper, this is ResearchGate. Title of the paper is called Radiation Science Using Z-pinch X-rays. It clearly says refinement of the methods described here is in progress to address multiple issues for radiation science. So we don't understand the physics of this. This kind of reminds me, Donny, of junk DNA. How quickly evolutionists jumped and said, you see, that proves evolution. All this 98% of the genome is junk. They ended up with egg on their face, didn't they? Until we did further research and we actually found that, hold on, it's not junk, it's just non-coding, but they have specific functions in how our genomes operate through, whether it's natural genes or through the epigenome, etc. So what my point is, we still don't know much about it. And I can say this without giving you too much away. There are people in the background are currently looking into this, okay? We're not going to provide you with an answer next week or next year. We may, but I doubt it. But it may need some new physics that we haven't really looked at or found that could explain it. Just like the Z-pinch experiments, no one would have assumed that we could create super heavy elements just by pointing a very hot laser at a pure metal and creating super heavy elements. No one would have, they would have laughed at you if you had said that. But yet we have shown that is possible, and it has occurred through multiple, I think it's thousands of experiments now have been done, not just by the Proton 21 laboratory, but a number of other countries around the world have also performed those experiments and confirmed it.
If you could reiterate a couple things. So I've pointed out here, and you can just do a little bit of study here. We're all exposed to a little bit of background radiation every single day, right? And to you, to me, to everybody, the levels range from pretty low, from about 1.5 to 3.5 here per year, but can be more than 50 per year. So basically, KC would say, okay, that's normal. That's not going to kill us. That's not harmful. But during the flood, because of the byproduct of accelerated radioisotope decay, you have all of this excess radiation that is essentially multiplied by hundreds of thousands to what we're normally exposed today. But with what you're saying, would you then argue that that's only the case if we have accelerated decay at the flood, as compared to these elements already pre-existing in the rocks at creation and therefore being manifested due to the catastrophic processes? So they're not really accelerated, they're just manifesting to the in the earth. Go ahead.
These are answers we don't have. These are questions we don't have answers to yet. That's why I said if even secular scientists actually admit that we need further progress into the area through a better understanding of how these things work. Look, it may have been a supernatural event. I'll admit I don't know, but as I said, there are people working behind the scenes at the moment on this issue, and I don't know if we're going to get an answer next week or next year, but there are people working on it. And similar to the junk DNA, I reckon they'll end up with egg on their face when we do find the physics that can resolve this issue. Just like Z-pinch showed that it's possible to create super heavy elements.
And then there's a counterbalancing effect.
Yeah.
Cold repackaging, is that what it would be called? Where
that's the other thing that they call it, a cold repacking instead of Z-pinch. Some refer to it as cold repacking, but it's the same principle. And look, there's also the accelerated cooling effect as well. Not much research has been done on that area with regards to the heat problem. So there's a multiple of things that we just haven't worked out yet.
Well,
right?
and that's typically what I've argued. And I did a whole show with Matt last week and a little bit here on the break period, is although we may not know the source or the mechanism behind the supercooling, perhaps it is supernatural. The Bible does say that God is Lord over the flood. And the point is, we have the microscopic areas of damage found in the rocks, these scars. And they shouldn't be there if there was this excess heat, radiation, and so on. Go ahead.
Okay, no, correct, Donny. You have all those fissures and zircon crystals that, as you said, they would have been annealed if there was such a heat event, and we wouldn't be finding any evidence of them at all, and yet we do. I think you touched on the helium problem, which their rescue device is. It leaked into the zircon crystal, and I forgot to ask Professor McQueen. He's done a lot of work on this, whether they did find cracks in the zircons where the helium could have leaked in. But you see all the fancy rescue devices they come up with. And I think one particular evolutionist said that once a crystal is formed, that it's pretty much sealed. It's a closed system. You can't get anything going in or out of it. So helium diffusion is a great example. I think the RAID team actually even predicted it accurately based on their analysis before they even actually did the tests, what they would find. Whereas the secular explanation was out by a factor of 100,000. So we always say the gold standard in science is empirical science. Test it, repeat it, and see what you get. Well, they did they did it with the diamonds. They did multiple tests with the diamonds and the C14. They did it with coal, C14 in coal samples. They did it in the helium in the zircon crystals, the radio halos, etc. But this is one thing that the evolutionists do. They hand wave away those things, and they come up with these elaborate rescue devices to appease their followers.
Well, let me say this too, and I'm just brainstorming here. Okay, if we have this excess radiation, but we do understand today that there are ways to shield from radiation. Okay, and a couple of these things would be, one major thing would be water as a source. We use this in nuclear reactors. Okay, And so the point is, where Casey, and again, I'm just brainstorming, not saying this is, the perfect answer, but it might be something to consider, where today we are subjected to low doses of radiation. They're not harmful. So at the flood, if accelerated nuclear decay occurred, and that truly is the answer, then I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, good point, Donny. I mean, I'm not sure if the listeners know, but Australia has 30% of the world's uranium, and I think 23% of the world's thorium. And there are many Aboriginal communities that live in those areas, yet there's no correlation between cancers and whatever between those communities and, say, the others that live away from those deposits. So I'm not an expert on it, but
well, here's what I just want to finish my thoughts here. So with King Crocoduck saying that there would be, hundreds of thousands of times more radiation during that flood year, which would essentially kill Noah, the ark animals, so on and so forth. Well, at the same time, there would be miles and miles of water basically covering the entire earth. You've got supersonic steam jets, fountains of the great deep breaking open. You've got, we've talked before about hypercanes that could act as a good way to at least remove the heat. I'm not too sure about the radiation, but I'm sure it'd help a little bit there too.
Well, don't forget, there's also three. This is secular predictions. They say that there's 3 times as much water in the in the mantle as there is on the surface via what's his name? I forget the term that they gave that. They found 3 times the volume of water in the mantle that's on the surface. So there's more water than just the water that you see on the surface.
Well, and we would, like, for example, Matt Bell makes a good point here, is we know for a brief amount of time at the Creation Week, we were looking at basically a water world before the lands themselves were created. And so, I'd like to know how much water would be necessary if the entire planet is covered by water, how much of that would take up and shield Noah and the ark animals from the excess heat, right? I wonder if we could get some calculations there, because King Crocoduck says, Donny, we are talking about energies that can pass through all the water on Earth 50 times. So it seems like KC is claiming then that no matter how much water you truly have on the Earth at that time, it still won't be enough to shield Noah and the ark animals from the excess radiation that they are being subjected to. You know what I mean? So it'd be interesting to get some numbers on that and see if that truly is the case. And maybe we can also consider the hypercane model, because we do know, and I know Jordan has criticized this and put some numbers together as well, but when we factor it into what we're saying here, we know that when a hurricane goes over the ocean, the temperature drops. And so this kind of convection would be a solid way to move heat quickly and then also shield from a lot of the radiation. And, here's one thing. We're arguing here with the atheists. What makes me laugh about your theistic evolutionists like Joel Duff here, no offense by this, but they actually claim to believe the Bible, right? So we're showing that you can have a supernatural event. Okay, I want to see Joel Duff here talk some theology, some soteriology, some eschatology. These theistic evolutionists, they don't have an excuse. They want to use the same arguments that the naturalistic atheists use and the evolutionists and agnostics. And I understand where people like King Crocoduck are coming from. They want to see if there's a naturalistic explanation for it. Okay, and that's what we're doing here. But when it comes to your so-called theists, the Bible says that God initiated the flood. God stopped the flood. God is Lord over the flood. 2 Peter 3 says that there's 3 things that the scoffers will deny: the creation, the world that then was being overflowed with water perished, and then the coming judgment by fire. Nobody would say that the coming judgment by fire is going to be localized to Australia or Canada or America. No, this is a worldwide judgment by fire. That's why we have worldwide language all throughout Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, the book of Daniel, and Revelation. Nobody would say that the creation event was localized. No, it was a worldwide creation. It was a universal creation event. So for Joel Duff to claim he's a theist, but then deny this, because he's going to want to say, well, the middle part of 2 Peter 3, the world that then was being overflowed with water perished, clearly speaking to the universal nature of it. He's going to say, well, that's localized, but with no justification, because these theistic evolutionists like Joel Duff, who I challenged to a debate on this issue, they have what's called sloppy hermeneutics, sloppy, inconsistent, unsophisticated Bible interpretation, because for no justification at all, he's going to say, well, the creation event's worldwide, the coming judgment by fire is worldwide, unless he has some kind of preterist interpretation of that, but I wouldn't be surprised. But the middle event that scoffers deny is apparently localized. No, it doesn't work, Joel. So for you, you're coming at this from a theistic perspective. The Bible says that God is Lord over the flood. Okay, God created this earth. God judged this earth by water. You have no excuse, my friend. But King Crocoduck, Jordan from Reason to Doubt, okay, they're looking for, a naturalistic explanation for it, because they reject the Bible as being God's word, right? Holy men spake as they were moved by the Holy Ghost. They don't believe that. We do. And if you're a theist, you're supposed to claim to believe that. So Joel Duff can't come at this with the same atheistic assumptions. Okay, because as I pointed out earlier, if God really is Lord of the flood, worst case scenario, if there is no naturalistic explanation for it, George, where there is accelerated radioisotope decay and therefore excess heat and radiation produced, there could also be accelerated supercooling and an acceleration in the way that heat or radiation is basically removed, or the way that Noah and the ark animals are shielded. Okay, so that's my point. And would you agree? If your so-called theists are coming at this from an atheistic starting point, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I wonder if Joel rejects the resurrection, or does he reject, Jesus bringing Lazarus back to life, changing water into wine, healing the blind and the sick. If you're going to reject one, you've got to reject all the other ones. Why accept some and not the others? Right. It's I think they're just trying to support their own narrative, Donny, and they've got blinkers on, and they just won't accept anything else. Yet they'll accept the resurrection, as I said, and the miracles and etc. that the Bible, but not the this supposed heat problem and irradiation problem. I'm hoping I'm still alive when we find out the physics of all this. I mean, I remember reading about junk DNA.
We're in the infancy of a lot of
definitely
science, especially genetics, right? We're just in the infancy of understanding the DNA language. That's what I like to point out when I argue with these evolutionists about DNA function. Okay. And, I've spoken with professional young earth creationists, and they've pointed out that there may be some wrong starting assumptions in the physics of this. Because we know Dr. Andrew Snelling, he's come up with numbers essentially from the rate team, but it's been pointed out to me that those could be based on wrong starting assumptions.
Yes.
Right. Because when it comes to physics in general, I mean, you get a wrong basic assumption going into the calculation of these numbers, then the numbers that result from the wrong starting point in basic assumptions are going to be totally off. They're going to be crazy. They're going to be wild. And that could be what we're dealing with here too. Go ahead, George.
And because we've sort of filled you in on this, we've had discussions with a number of different people about this particular issue, and all I'll say at this stage is we're working on it, and just keep tuned in, and we'll see whether we can actually progress this argument. I just look. I come from an evolutionary background, right? I was a theistic evolutionist myself, but it's not until you start to really delve into the data that you realize how wrong you were in your assumptions about evolution. And the old saying about once bitten, twice shy. Sorry, I'm never going back there again, because I've done enough analytical research to realize that evolution is baloney. And as I said, they keep and Donny, I've got another 20 minutes of presentation to show the secular heat problems, which they won't address.
Right.
They won't address.
Right. So
even their own models contradict the 4.5 billion years. The iron core, for example, their own calculations show a time of about 10 billion years from memory, and according to them, the Earth is 4.5 billion years. But you see how, I mean, we point these out, and it's a hand wave. Oh, we don't care about that. We only worry about your heat problem. That's a double standard, isn't it?
Well, it's a double standard, and what I want you to do, brother, is present that. So what we're going to do is we're going to this last section, if you don't mind, George, we're going to present it.
I'll summarize it quickly, so I won't dwell into it too much.
Okay, so let me say this, since we're going to give you the floor. Now, here's the challenges to the theistic evolutionists, the old Earth creationists, and especially the naturalistic evolutionists. Firstly, we have, Dr. Andrew Snelling here, who does say there's a lot of heat produced, but oftentimes you'll get these guys misrepresenting him by saying he's given no solution to this. He's basically tapped out. That's not the case. He said, he pointed out that since these radio halos and fission tracks exist, microscopic areas of damage in the rocks, I want to see people like Joel Duff answer this challenge, because I've pointed out, and I've pointed out for years now, that at least a year, that since these exist, that may suggest a supernatural explanation in terms of supercooling. But if they want to scoff at the supernatural aspect of the flood and the heat removal, radiation removal, you have to deal with the fact that they are caught between a rock and a hard place, because they're saying too much heat and radiation is produced, and yet we have evidence for accelerated decay that, yes, would produce heat and radiation. So if this was not, let's say, supernaturally dealt with, then how do we have accelerated decay and the result of accelerated decay in these radio halos and fission tracks, since they would be obliterated by this excess amount of heat? But the fact they're there for us to observe, what's suggested here, if there had been a heat problem due to accelerated radioactive and nuclear decay, then we should not find these scars in the rocks. I want to see them deal with it. We've spent show after show going over the radiocarbon that's found in all sorts of samples. We've dealt with their rescue devices of nearby material that could supposedly recharge the radiocarbon in diamonds. We've addressed that. That's an argument Hugh Ross puts forth. We've addressed the contamination. I want to see them address that. Erica put forth a rescue device on the cold material near Earth's core. You show that was weak. That doesn't work. So they're going to have to go back. They may not be satisfied with our responses to heat and radiation, but that doesn't mean that they can be lazy in terms of addressing their own problems. They're the ones that want to say that their position's empirical science and everybody needs to be forced to learn it because it's basically truth and fact. So no, I want to see them deal with those problems. I want to see them deal with the fission tracks, the radio halos, and how those could exist if basically what they're saying is true, that there was no removal of any kind of this heat and radiation. Because I've pointed out too, here's the last thing I'll say, George, is that a lot of the heat could be used naturally as a feature, as a function, in terms of basically answering some of their other objections, right? Because they want to say there's too many fossils, too much oil, natural gas, and plant material. Coal, for example, for us to explain. But then they also want to say that there's too much heat. When in reality, we understand that heat can be utilized to rapidly form coal, natural gas, and oil. And so your pre-flood world would act as the perfect battery to rapidly produce that which the skeptics say we can't explain: coal, natural gas, obviously fossils, just in terms of the catastrophic processes during the flood, and oil. Now I'm not saying that removes all the heat and radiation. I'm just saying at least a portion of that heat produced can be utilized, can act as a feature, can function in a beneficial way in terms of creating a lot of what we see. I haven't seen the numbers yet of an Earth that is basically 90% plant material, 90% green as compared to today, right? I want to see the numbers of that and how much basically heat can be absorbed in the utilization of all that plant material in the pre-flood world to create all of these all of this oil, natural gas, and coal. You know, have we seen numbers to that? I don't think so. But anyways, I'm gonna wrap it up there with myself. I want to see some answers to these challenges from the critics. Okay, if they still have a problem with this heat issue.
well,
So
Donny,
George, I'm gonna hand it to you to wrap it up.
Yeah, well, Donny, we've spoken about this before. We require some heat to actually increase the viscosity of the mantle interaction with the crust to have quick movement of separation of the continents. So we already know that increasing the viscosity of the mantle can actually facilitate the movement of.
I got it. I'm interrupting you. I know you're going to be mad, but I just have to address this. Joel Duff says,
"Yeah,
it was a miracle. Why is it so hard to?" I've already said this for over a year. I said the critics are rejecting the miraculous aspect of the flood. God is Lord over the flood. They are rejecting that, but not addressing the fact that we have these microscopic areas of damage due to accelerated decay in the rocks in the forms of radio halos and fission tracks. We've dealt with the rescue devices employed so far by the critics. Okay, so their existence demonstrates that there was some type of, whether it be miraculous, supercooling, or rapid removal of excess radiation. That needs to be dealt with. Okay, that is similar to in genetics when I point out that Adam, Eve, and the created kinds were created with increased levels of heterozygosity. And a prediction of that, okay, a prediction of the supernatural creation of Adam and Eve with design diversity is DNA function. And so if that prediction comes true and the trajectory favors genome-wide functionality, that suggests that yes, since the majority of our DNA differences, DNA elements, are functional and beneficial and important and necessary to sustain healthy life processes in the cell, that points us back to the supernatural creation of Adam and Eve. Just like the existence of these radio halos and fission tracks, which are obliterated at relatively low temperatures, point us back to the supernatural and miraculous removal of heat and excess radiation. So you can't just disregard the supernatural aspect of heat and radiation removal, because in order to do so, you have to address the radio halos and the fission tracks. George, does that make sense? And if you want to share a screen, do so, brother.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, I do. I want to cover their own heat problems, which really they never address. And even when they do, they tend to put it aside. So I'll just go back to sharing my screen again, Donny. So,
and as you're doing that, let me just thank FDS $50 super chat.
Oh yeah, great stuff.
And God bless you. You know, you guys are the life and blood in this channel, in this community. It's why, praise the Lord, all the glory to God. We've been able to do this full time for a few years now, and what a blessing. Living the dream, I guess you could say. So we're going to try and top 2022 and 2023. It's not going to be easy though, because it's been a wild year, but with your support, your continued support, we may just be able to do that. So God bless you. And FDS, thanks again. George Bond, go ahead.
I concur with all that, Donny. As I said, they don't seem to be addressing the inner core. Can you see the screen, by the way?
Yes.
You can?
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things is the formation of the inner core. This is a secular paper. Okay. References are down there. You'll find that if you want an in-depth description of all these secular heat problems, we actually did I think over 2-hour presentation on SFT maybe 6 months ago now, but I'm just going to breeze through it a little bit. So you'll see here the time needed for the formation of the inner core blows out beyond the expected 1 billion year age to at least 10 billion years. That's even longer than the alleged 4.5 billion year age of the entire Earth. Now, that's their own calculations that have said that. I touched up on the formation of granite and how they believe the Earth was molten 4.5 billion years, and it's slowly cooled down. Well, we should be finding those various minerals in their respective densities, if that was the case. I spoke a lot about fulgurites. That's fossilized lightning. We only seem to find these fulgurites on the surface layer of the Earth. We don't seem to find any in the preceding layers. I mean, if these things are millions to billions of years old, why aren't we finding fulgurites? Some will say, oh, they eroded. Well, look at the layers. There's very little evidence of erosion that occurred between those layers. And of course, the Tapete sandstone. And this is a great example of how the evolutionists or the secular community will do anything to prevent creationists from doing research that could support our particular narrative, okay? When AIG applied for a permit to undertake the take samples from the Tapete sandstone, especially in those 90-degree bends, they were rejected. They had to go to court to get that permit. And anyway, finally they got their permits. They did their tests, and under the secular scenario, those bends were created deep down in the Earth, probably 3-4 kilometers down, under heat and pressure and lateral compression to bend them. Well, sorry, but the results so far show that there's no evidence of metamorphosis. There's no crystallization in those layers, which means that heat was not involved. So those layers had to be moist when they were bent and dried in the ensuing years. Okay, I mentioned the crust of the Earth with the granite. These are the specific minerals that are there in their respective densities. If it cooled over hundreds of millions of years, then you should expect to see those specific minerals in that particular order. The super heavy elements, we already spoke about the Z-pinch experiments, how we can show empirically that super heavy elements can be created in a matter of minutes or seconds. But in this particular case, why is it that we find 90% of the radioactivity on continental crusts? Okay, and you look at that, the radioactivity on land is spotty and not even as you would expect of a molten rock planet. That's 4.5 billion years. The reason why I said that, if the Earth was a molten ball of rock for 1 billion, 1.5 billion, and it was rotating, you'd expect those super heavy elements to have assimilated through that material in a fairly even manner. But notwithstanding that, they're called super heavy elements for a reason. They are super heavy elements because they're super heavy. So you'd expect over 1 billion to 1.5 billion years for those super heavy elements to have sunk deep down into the core. We don't find that. Okay, the moon impact. How often have we said, like we've heard that, what was it? The impact theory. The impact theory. Well, sorry, but carbon emissions from the moon are forcing scientists to question the theory that it was formed in a collision between Earth and the wandering planet Theia. Theia is a Greek word. I think it means auntie. Okay, so auntie came back and collided with Earth. So this is from Japanese spacecrafts. Okay, they say this amount of carbon. Oh, by the way, the carbon is a volatile, and so is water. And they find these gases and on the moon, and it says this amount of carbon should have been utterly vaporized by the intense temperatures generated in the colossal impact event. but the findings suggest carbon has been there ever since the moon's formation 4.5 billion years ago, meaning the impact theory may need to be considered. Now, those aren't my words. Those are from the paper, from the Japanese paper. Again, I'll state carbon is a volatile element that has considerable influence on the formation and evolution of planetary bodies. So why do we find carbon on the moon if it was supposed to be completely vaporized? Okay, water comets. The secular explanation, water actually arrived on Earth through comet impacts. When you look at the volume of water and the volume of a comet and equate it to energy and number of impacts, you get something like this. You get 4.2 by 10 to the 24th joules per year for 500 million years hitting the Earth. That's based on I think their assumptions that the water arrived on Earth through multiple comet impacts on Earth over a 500 million year period. Now, if you equate that to, say, Hiroshima bombs, that's 6.7 by 10 to the 10th power Hiroshima bombs per year for 500 million years. That's a lot of boom, guys. And of course, the other one is the CMB, the horizontal problem. Why is the CMB so even across the universe? And we're talking about these different colors. Cleverly, by the way, they're shown as blue, a lighter blue, a yellow, and a red. But those are thousandths of a Kelvin difference, by the way. So it's nothing like the image that you see there. And their own predictions show that the universe should have been 50 degree Kelvin, and then they found it was. Then they repredicted it to 5, and then after they've made the investigations, they settled on 3, and they found that it was 2.73 Kelvin. That's cooking the books from my point of view. The Earth's magnetic field. Now this is from ICR, but I've read articles from secular as well. Like the Earth's magnetic field, for example, decays with at an exponential decay of 1400 years as its half life. Now, if you actually go back, say 6,000 years, that's 20 times stronger. But if you go 50,000 years ago, the magnetic field would have been 56 billion times stronger. That's about equivalent to a neutron star. Everything would have been cooked and vaporized in that. They won't address those, right? They won't address those. So hopefully I've presented enough I guess, bullets. I've fired enough bullets at them to say, okay, explain yourselves with those particular heat problems of your own. They won't do it. I've never seen anyone address those. So you've seen how the secular camp have multiple heat problems that they ignore or hand wave away, but it's the creationists who have a heat problem. How amazing is that, eh? Here's an interesting fact, guys. Get a load of this, right? I just sort of basically bumped into this and thought to myself, let's do a bit of maths here. So the secular geologists claim that the Earth is 4.7 billion years old, and the young creationists claim it's 6,000 years old. So creationists believe the fossil record was laid down by a flood 4,500 years ago, and the Evos believe it started 3.5 billion years ago. So if you divide 3.5 into 4.5, you get 75%, and the leftover, of course, is 25%. Now, hello, listen to this. It is interesting, dividing 4,500 into 6,000, you also get 75%, and the same leftover of 12%. Isn't that amazing? So I'll finish at that point, Donny. I think I've made enough points there, but they can actually see the more detailed presentation of the secular heat problems in our play. I think it's in the playlist somewhere. I can't remember which one.
Has there been a response to that 2-hour heat secular challenge video that we put out months ago? Has there been any answers to that challenge, George?
I haven't seen anything apart from some comments that they made in the not in the chat, in the actual comments section of the video. But no scientific stuff. Like I presented, mathematics to show that the heat transfer can be absorbed by the mantle easily enough by just purely by an increase of 350 degrees centigrade in the mantle material. But I haven't seen any calculations. Oh, by the way, I think you're probably aware of this. Jordan sent me a document about the carbon-14 in the coal. Now, I apart from doing my own research, I also sent it to ICR, CMI, etc., and they sent some replies.
Yeah, I read that exchange.
Yeah, you read it? Yeah.
Yeah, can you reiterate some of those points? Actually, before you do, let me just say, Joel, we love you, even though we disagree. Don't confuse assertiveness at times with
non-problems. Oh, unbelievable. Non-problems.
Well, and this is what I want to say in a nice way. So, Joel, anybody, we're just looking for, and me personally, I'll say, and I'm going to put this challenge up here. So, Joel knows, he's been engaging in the creation evolution debate for a while. What we call this in debate world, at least. And I don't know if anybody's moderated or hosted or done more debates than me, George. I'm not sure. So I think I know a thing or two about debates. This is what's called assertions and claims. Okay, that's fallacious and weak. If it's not false, I can make an assertion, but I got to back it up. Now, Joel, again, we love you, and we just want to convert you to the truth here on what the Bible says pertaining to creation, ancestry, and the flood. I understand in comment sections, the number of text, the number of letters and words are limited, unfortunately. So if you email George a list of, or an explanation for why these are non-problems and back up the claims, we will analyze them. We do have plenty of conversations, right, George, with those who are experts in various fields like geology, physics, chemistry. So even if we need a little help to analyze it, we will do so. And I will say that, so here's the challenge that I have for the Gutsy Gibbons of the world, the King Crocoducks, the Jordans. If you can answer this challenge, send me it. I'll analyze it. I'll get good friends of mine that are experts in these topics as well to analyze it with me. Here's the basic challenge. How do you explain the existence of radio halos and fission tracks, which are evidence for accelerated decay in the past, if there was no supernatural removal of heat and radiation? It's as simple as that. We can get a video, an email, a comment, and I will personally take my time analyzing it. George, I think you can agree that in the world of creation, nobody has put out more content on the heat problem than us. I think before we became a ministry and started battling the critics on ERVs, chromosome 2 fusion, heat problems, so on and so forth, there really wasn't much out in the world on that topic, at least in videos. So that's testimony to the fact that, yes, we mean this. Okay. Send us, talking to the critics here, send us arguments to these challenges, responses to these challenges. And this one's fairly simple. Is this not an easy challenge? This is a simple question. I've put it in the form of 2 comments. We'll analyze it. And you know what? If I get a sufficient response to that, I'll admit that currently there's no solution to the heat problem. Okay. But I want to see, yeah, Joel Duff's a theist. And that's the only thing that frustrates me is when I find that the old earthers and the theistic evolutionists, they can't use the same approach. They can, but it's not consistent. Okay. When they use the same forms of argumentation, George, tell me what you think about this, as the atheistic or naturalistic evolutionist, that's not consistent because they have a different starting point than the evolutionist. The naturalistic evolutionists like Casey and Jordan, they reject the Bible. They reject God's word. They reject the supernatural. They would reject the virgin birth. They would reject the resurrection. They will reject the second coming of Jesus Christ, the judgment of the dead. They would reject the millennium. They would reject any of these events in the Bible that have a supernatural aspect to them. So for a theist to utilize the same line of argumentation and thinking, it's fallacious, it's wrong, it's a denial of God's word. Jamie Russell has a great point here. Where do they, I want to know, where do the theistic evolutionists draw the naturalism line? As I study genetics and ancestry and work on more and more books, the so-called heat and radiation problem doesn't bother me. Because again, supernatural explanations for certain problems, they don't bother me. And especially in the world of genetics, you know, we've already demonstrated the existence, the separate ancestry being the case, a young genome. And so, anyways, Joel kind of cracks me up. But I will say to any of the critics, we appreciate the engagement. This is important. Critical thinking is important. These conversations need to happen. And that's why we started implementing these debates, these discussions, these open mics, these panel debates, these live responses. A few years ago when I began this, and that is a good point. Truth. When it comes to these atheists, you know, the Bible says the natural man understands not the things of the Spirit of God. Okay. They're spiritually, there's no discernment. They don't have the Holy Spirit. They don't have the regenerated new man. You know, they're not baptized into the body of Christ. They don't have that pull, right? But we know the Bible says that the Holy Spirit guides us into all truth and knowledge. So, okay, when it comes to your atheists, a lot of them, they're just going to choose what, George? To be willingly ignorant, to be stubborn, to accept a delusion, basically. We just pray that they don't reach that point as per Romans 1, where they're given over to a reprobate mind. Okay, that's sad. We don't want that for anybody. But for like a professing theist to utilize the same arguments that an atheist would use based on their naturalistic starting point, it just doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense to me, you know? So anyways, I kind of ranted there for a while. Apologies,
Yeah,
George.
I'll just quickly talk about the C40 Nicole that Jordan sent us. He was proposing a uranium count in the coal that was far greater than what's actually found on site. To his credit, though, he did make 6 or 7 assumptions. I can't remember them at the top of my head. But when you look at the distribution of the uranium and thorium in coal samples, there were some instances where uranium counts of 10 parts per million are found, but none of those sites were actually mined for coal. So I challenged Jordan, publish the paper, go to the sites where the creationists obtain their samples, measure the uranium and thorium in those samples, and then you calculate your own, C14 volumes out of those samples. I mean, I based it on his figures and combined it with what Dr. Baumgartner had done in the RATE team. And Dr. Baumgartner actually had a look at my calculations and he agreed with them. Even under Jordan's scenario, you'd still get 1,000 times less carbon-14 than they actually find. You remember with Dr. Baumgartner, I think the figure was 13,000. So I think he said you need 13,000 times more uranium to produce the level of carbon-14 that's found, and that's not what we find. But it was interesting to note that particular exercise, because some of the big stalwarts of creation actually agreed with my assessment of it. But here's something new. I'm going to introduce the subscribers to something new, Donny. This is still new stuff, but the JWST images, that's the James Webb Space Telescope images, are showing fully formed galaxies get a load of this. A galaxy is redshifted at 13 to 35 billion light years away. Can you see the problem there? According to their model, you shouldn't be seeing fully formed galaxies at 13 to 35 billion light years away, because that sort of adds. Remember when we had Dr. Lyle on, and he spoke about the anisotropic principle. I mean, imagine this, Donny. Imagine if what we're seeing is an instantaneous light speed to the observer, which sort of verifies what Dr. Lyle was talking about. But not only that, what they actually have found by doing spectral analysis, they actually found oxygen. Now, under their own theory, their Big Bang theory, oxygen doesn't form in first-generation stars. And if these are early formation stars, they should be first-generation stars. So on two counts...
Keep going, George. Joel loves it. This is Joel's favorite topic. Here we go. He's ready. He loves it.
On two counts, the Big Bang has been proven wrong. So now what I'm doing, I'm waiting for the rescue devices that'll come because of this. I guarantee you there'll be rescue devices. They'll come up with something.
Oh, they love
anyway,
it.
That's all I got to say. I think we've been going on nearly 3 hours here, so...
Well, you know what? Just so we can make it to the 3-hour mark and make this the most comprehensive show on the heat problem in existence, can you reiterate for anybody just joining us? Because I don't want the Gutsy Gibbons of the world to credit where credit is due. Erica did do a pretty good job editing her latest video. Gave me a couple good laughs. I'm pretty easygoing, so I'm not bothered by little jabs, right? They kind of crack me up, actually. She likes to call me Donny Deals, and that kind of makes me smile. I don't mind it. I don't mind the friendly banter and the jab here and there, but nonetheless, I don't want her dodging the fact that she did attempt to address the cold slabs. She attempted to address them according to the actualist position and starting point. These massive slabs of cool rock that exist deep within the earth that basically should have melted or assimilated to the surrounding material. Can you reiterate what her answer was and why it doesn't work, George? I know you touched on it in your presentation, but let's reiterate it, kind of like how I just reiterated the challenge. That again, any critic, any evolutionist, I made the challenge clear. I put it up on screen. I've talked about it several times. Email me, leave me a comment, answer the challenge. And what I would even do is publish it on our website, and then we'll respond to the challenge. And if you've met the challenge diligently, honestly, then I will admit so. But at this point, I haven't seen an answer to that challenge nor the secular heat challenges. But yeah, George, as we wrap it up here, can you reiterate basically how she answered the existence of these cold slabs and why it doesn't work, brother?
Oh, okay, well, she pointed to a paper that I read probably a couple of months after it was actually published, and I read it with interest. And in no way does it refute the cold place slabs, but cold subduction slabs. A couple of things. If you read the paper yourself, and I don't know if you want me to bring it up on the shared screen, but it's easily accessible. I think just type in, let me read the slab. It's the title of the paper is called Slab Temperature Evolution Over the Lifetime of a Subduction Zone. Now, if you like, just mention it in the comments section.
Is this the one? Because I watched all of Erica's video, and is this the one that I just can't remember the exact name of the paper she had? This is the one?
Yes,
the slab temperature.
That's exactly the one. I showed a screenshot of her and with the paper in the background. Mm-hmm. And look, primarily without going through all the, I mean, they can always rewind and replay the section, right, and see all the details. But they make a number of assumptions.
This one right here, George.
Oh, you got it. Yeah, that's the one. Yes, that's the one. That's the paper. If they read that, they'll find out that there's a number of assumptions, speculation, and conjecture that goes along with that. And notwithstanding all that, Donny, they actually modelled up to 100 kilometres depth. And as I said earlier, these subduction coal slabs that we spoke about are 700 kilometres down into the mantle. So in short, that's pretty much it. But I can quote you some of the things from the paper that they actually said, which even they agree that it's based on their model, and there's many very what is it? Yeah, they do say that to investigate these probably we focus on the slab moho and slab top temperatures at relatively shallow depths. That is in brackets 60 and 100 kilometres. And they say these tests are motivated by considerable uncertainty regarding the physical mechanism responsible for the down dip decoupling to coupling transition. These are their words, okay? They're not mine. So they also make the point that the average depth to slab top beneath active volcanic arcs is in the order of 100 kilometres, which presents an issue for the latter stages of such models where the DD increase is substantially greater than 100 kilometres. We're talking 700 here. But they themselves say, due to the generic nature of our models, it is inappropriate to use this model as a direct proxy for any specific Earth subduction zone. So, and there's a section in the paper that talks about limitations of our approach. I guarantee you, Erica wouldn't have read this entire paper, because if she had, she would have realised the amount of limitations that model has, the amount of assumptions and conjecture that goes with it, and she would have dropped it as a possible solution or debunking of the coal slabs argument. It's nowhere near that. So even the actual authors of the paper say, this is quote, as we progress to applying dynamic models to the thermal structure of specific subduction zones, an assessment of the importance of such complexities within a particular setting will be critical. So they don't know everything. So then they say, because we consider the generic subduction zone with simplifying assumptions, we cannot assess PT, pressure temperature conditions, that is, related to specific regions and or the contribution of additional heat sources, e.g. shear heating, radiogenic heating, fluid transport, etc. While we do not model any of the processes related to rock detachment and exhumation, both low temperatures and rapid rates could indeed have a negative effect on rock detachment. So, as I said, there are numerous assumptions and conjecture and speculation associated with it. And as I said, it's a model that they created, which I would say they looked at their long-term ages, and then they developed that model to agree with that. So it's a bit like assuming evolution to prove evolution. It's no more than circular reasoning. So that's in a nutshell, Donny. I mean, I was surprised she used that paper, because I've actually mentioned it in previous streams.
Right.
As been a laughable explanation for the coal slabs.
It reminds me of, I've been talking about the Y chromosomal dissimilarity, and basically the lack of uniqueness or inconsistencies in the great ape family in terms of nested hierarchies, on how, and I just debated Grayson on this for a while, on how your chimpanzee and gorilla Y chromosomes are essentially more similar when you consider everything than the human and the chimpanzee Y chromosome. As a matter of fact, human and chimpanzee Y chromosomes, when you consider overall architecture, gene content, and size differences, are only about 35 to 45% the same. That's very, very different. And so when they finally began to attempt to address the challenges I put forth, which it took a while, but once they did, they started deriving their answers from the same papers that I've been citing for the months as I advanced this challenge. And I would put forth as rescue devices from the evolutionist side, pointing out that yes, they look to X, Y, Z, but give me more than just conjecture and hypothesizing if you want to say your answer is science. And we should still hold a universal ancestry. So it seems like it's what they're doing here too, right, George? They're just pointing to a paper now that they're just starting to read, that you've been aware of, you've read it a while ago, and you've pointed out that it's conjecture, a lot of storytelling, circular reasoning, assume evolution to prove evolution. They're just going to have to do a lot better than that. Isn't that right, George?
Yeah, correct. I mean, look, I get involved in probably more in the comments section than I should, but it's interesting that even when I provide secular papers with citations from that paper, they'll accuse me of quote mining, even though it's their own. And it's obvious from the comments that they've never read the paper themselves. And there was an example with the valves in Japan where the guy obviously read the title of the paper and said, "Aha, gotcha." And then, of course, he challenged me to read the paper, and I did. Not only did I read the paper, but I also read the references that are cited in the paper. And when you read that information, you finally sort of see that it's baloney, because they to get the argon dating, they didn't get access it from the particular site. They actually went to, get a list, Korea. They went to Korea and got a sample from there to do the argon's dating method done. And it's just look, even claim that the difference in the VAV counts between the SG bore and the SG4 was due to a earthquake 7,500 years ago. And I said, well, okay, can you verify that? Where did you get the 7,500 years? And where did you read that it was due to a earthquake? So he was trying to explain the difference in the VAV counts between the two boreholes was due to an earthquake 7,500 years. And he couldn't provide multiple times, I think 6-7 times I asked him, show me where it says in the literature that's mentioned that it's an earthquake 7,500 years. He wouldn't show me. He couldn't show me. So they do make some stuff up. You can see when you challenge them on some of the details that they actually put out in the comment section. Well, hey, George, mate, it's 2:00 here and I haven't had lunch.
I was just going to say the same thing. I've had half of my dinner earlier. I'm going to go pig out now. This was comprehensive, technical. This was awesome. Must watch. I want people to share this around. I will let people know in a few weeks. We'll give the critics a few weeks, even a month, and I'll let them know if they've attempted to address our challenges or even see if Gutsick Gibbon has done anything in terms of countering your points here on the cold slab. So the challenges are out. I've asked a very basic and easy to understand question regarding the fission tracks and the radio halos and how they're basically obliterated at low temperatures in relation to the heat problem. So to the critics, email, comment section, whatever it is, let me know. Facebook me if you want. I don't care. But let's get some, let's get the critics to put in the work. Okay, we've been putting in the work. And they're going to complain, of course, but that's fine. We've put in the work. This is 3+ hours. Now we want some answers to our challenges. Credit where credit is due. Erica attempted on the cold slabs in her last video. It was an insufficient response, but she did put in the work. So let's see some counters and some answers to our other challenges. Okay, brother, I heard the phone ring for you, so I'm just going to wrap it up here. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Thank you so much to everybody who supported this show, sent in super chats, gifts, donations, so on and so forth. We've been doing a lot of shows. I think we've done now 7 shows just in the last 8 days. So
Donny,
tomorrow
Donny, it was a telemarketing survey. They were offering me $1,000 to answer a few questions.
Now, did the questions relate to the heat problem?
No,
You're like, I've retired from answering questions.
I
on the
hung
heat
the
problem.
phone up. Yeah, unbelievable. Yes.
Okay, I hope everybody enjoyed all the bonus material since our brother Professor McQueen left. I think we touched on all our bases, all the points we wanted to. We've issued our challenges. We're going to wrap it up here. George, my man, I know you got a nice day ahead of you, some breakfast or lunch, maybe a workout, and so walking the dog. So I appreciate you being here, and also to the audience. George, any last words, my brother?
God bless you all. I really have to go, Donny, because I need to do quite a few things. I have to prepare for a funeral of a cousin of mine. His wife passed away last week.
Well, I'm sorry to hear. Yeah, no worries. We're going to wrap it up right here. Prayers for you and the family, brother. God bless. Thanks for all your work. And Standing for Truth is out.